Yeah, Mom, I know, I get it. I pinched the bridge of my nose, staring at the cracked plaster of my dorm room ceiling. The phone felt hot against my ear. No, I didn't spend it all on beer. The textbook was $200. $200. For a book, I'll open 3 times. The silence on the other end was heavy with disapproval. It was the same conversation we had every other week. A dance of numbers and justifications that always left me feeling like a child. Look, can you spot me 50? I'll pay you back next month. Promise. Another beat of silence. Then, a sigh that traveled 300 miles through the line. Fine, Ethan, but this is the last time. Thanks, Mom. You're a lifesaver. Seriously. I know. I love you. Love you too, I mumbled, and hit the red icon to end the call. Relief washed over me, a greasy film over the deeper layer of shame. I tossed the phone onto my unmade bed. It bounced on the lumpy comforter and landed beside a pile of laundry I should have done last week. Click. It was a small sound. Soft. A noise from the hallway, probably. My door latching, even though I knew it was already closed. Or maybe Mrs. Gable's door across the hall. Her hearing was shot. She was always slamming things. I flopped back onto the bed, the springs groaning in protest. I stared up at the ceiling, at the water stain that looked vaguely like a screaming face if you squinted just right. My world was these 4 walls, this bed, a desk buried under books and empty noodle cups. It was my cage and my castle. I closed my eyes, letting the exhaustion sink in. Whatever the sound was, it didn't matter. I must have drifted for a few minutes, hovering in that gray space between awake and asleep. Then another sound pulled me out. Knock, knock, knock. 3 solid, even raps on my door. Not too loud, not too soft. Annoyingly normal. It had to be Dave. He probably forgot his keycard again. It's open! I yelled, not bothering to move. Nothing. The doorknob didn't turn. I said it's open, you jackass! Still nothing. Just the low hum of the mini-fridge in the corner. A surge of irritation got me on my feet. I stomped over to the door, my bare feet cold on the cheap linoleum. I was ready to rip into Dave for being an idiot. I twisted the handle and pulled the door inward with more force than necessary. The hallway was empty. I leaned out, looking left then right. The long, sterile corridor stretched out in both directions, lit by the buzzing fluorescent tubes that cast everything in a sickly yellow-white light. The patterned carpet was worn and stained. The air smelled of industrial cleaner and stale pizza. There was no one there. Not a soul. The door to Dave's room, 2 down on the left, was shut. Mrs. Gable's door across the hall was also closed tight. A prank, then. Some freshman idiots running around knocking on doors. Real funny, assholes, I muttered to the empty space. I felt a prickle of anger, but nothing more. It was a dumb dorm prank. I slammed the door shut, the sound echoing a little too loudly in my small room. I made a mental note to check the peephole next time before getting up. I turned my back to the door. Knock, 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 knock. 4 of them this time. The rhythm was different. Not the even, friendly beat from before. This was measured. Deliberate. Tap, 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 tap. That last one came a half second after the first 3, an afterthought that made the hairs on my arms stand up. My irritation vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp spike of unease. This wasn't a prank anymore, this was weird. Who is it? I called out, my voice louder than I intended. The only answer was the hum of the fridge. I didn't move. I just stood in the middle of my room, listening. The silence from the other side of the door was heavy. It felt like it was listening back. My heart started to beat a little faster. This is stupid, I told myself. It's nothing. But I didn't believe it. I crept toward the door, my footsteps silent this time. I put my eye to the peephole. The fisheye lens showed me the same empty hallway, the same flickering light, the same worn carpet. Nothing, absolutely nothing had changed. But it felt different. The emptiness felt wrong. It felt watched. I pulled back from the peephole, a shiver running down my spine. And then, my phone lit up on the bed. The screen glowed with an incoming call. The vibration was a low, angry buzz against my comforter. My blood went cold. The name on the screen wasn't a name. It was 2 words in stark white letters. Unknown caller. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic, trapped bird. Don't answer. You never answer those. It's always a scam. A telemarketer. Something. But this wasn't something. It was connected to the knocking. I knew it. Knew it with a certainty that made my stomach clench. I stood frozen, staring at the glowing rectangle on my bed. The buzzing seemed to fill the entire room. My breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't move. I could only stare at the phone and listen to the huge, waiting silence behind the door. Then came a new sound. Squeak. Slow. Metal on metal. My eyes shot from the phone to the doorknob. It was turning. I saw it. A slow, steady rotation, as if an invisible hand were closing around it on the other side. A hand with infinite patience. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on a stray textbook. I almost went down. My mind was a blank slate of pure, animal terror. Fight or flight. Run. Hide. I scrambled for a weapon. The only thing in reach was the cheap badminton racket I'd bought for a PE class, propped against the wall. I snatched it, my knuckles white on the grip. It felt flimsy, ridiculous, a toy against whatever was on the other side of that door. The knob stopped turning. For a second, there was only silence again. My ears were ringing. The phone on the bed had stopped vibrating. The screen was dark. Then, a sound that broke every law of physics I knew. Scrape. Thunk. The sound of the deadbolt. The one you can only turn from the inside. I watched in horror as the small metal knob on my side of the door began to rotate. It moved with a grinding, protesting slowness. It was being turned from the outside. That was not possible. It was not possible. My breath was trapped in my lungs. My mind was screaming, but no sound came out. I could only watch the bolt slide, millimeter by agonizing millimeter, out of its housing in the doorframe. The click when it finally disengaged was as loud as a gunshot in the silent room. The door swung inward. It opened, and I saw my room. My breath exploded from my chest in a choked gasp. I was standing by the door, holding the racket, looking into my room. At my unmade bed, at the desk buried in clutter, at the water stain on the ceiling. And standing in the middle of the room, looking back at me with wide, terrified eyes, was me. I was holding a badminton racket. His mouth was open in a silent scream. Our eyes met across the impossible space, a mirror image of shared terror. The world dissolved into a smear of color and suffocating pressure. Everything went black. I gasped, my eyes flying open. I was lying on my back. In my bed, the ceiling above me was the same cracked plaster, the same familiar water stain. My heart was pounding, a wild drum against my ribs. A dream. It was just a dream. A nightmare, brought on by stress and cheap ramen. My phone started ringing. The sound sliced through the quiet room, loud and shrill. I jolted upright, my t-shirt soaked in a cold sweat. I looked at the phone. It was vibrating on the comforter. My mom's picture was on the screen. Relief hit me so hard it made me dizzy. It was my mom. Not unknown caller. It was all a dream. The knocking, the turning knob, the impossible door. A dream. I let out a shaky laugh. I felt like an idiot. I snatched the phone, my thumb hovering over the green icon. The stress was really getting to me. I needed to get more sleep. I didn't answer. In a fit of lingering annoyance from our earlier conversation and the phantom terror of the nightmare, I just tossed the phone back onto the bed. It bounced on the lumpy comforter and landed beside a pile of laundry. Click! The sound was a single, dry click. Just like before, my eyes snapped open. I was on my bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling. My heart was a frantic fist beating against my ribs. Sweat. My shirt was plastered to my skin. Cold. It wasn't the dream. The dream was over. This was the aftermath. The lingering terror that clung to you like a fever. It was just a nightmare. That's all. The fight with Mom, the stress about money, sleeping on a stomach full of cheap noodles. It was the perfect recipe for a head trip. The whole thing. The knocking. The turning knob. Me, staring at me. A classic stress fantasy. My brain just took the feeling of being trapped in this shoebox and made it literal. My throat was sandpaper. I pushed myself up, the bed springs groaning. My feet hit the cold floor. The mini fridge in the corner hummed its low, monotone song. I needed water. I needed to wash the taste of phantom fear out of my mouth. I stumbled over to it, my legs feeling unsteady. I pulled the door open, the little interior light blinking on. A single bottle of water sat there, slick with condensation. I grabbed it, twisted the cap, and drained half of it in one long, desperate gulp. The water was cold, almost painfully so. It felt real. It grounded me. I leaned against the desk, catching my breath. My eyes scanned the room, unconsciously taking inventory. Bed, unmade. Laundry pile, still a threat. Desk, a disaster zone of textbooks, notes, and a single half-eaten bag of chips. Everything was stupidly, blessedly normal. Except my textbook, The Principles of Macroeconomics, a $200 paperweight. I had left it closed last night. I was sure of it. I remembered slamming it shut, frustrated that I couldn't focus. Now, it was open. Not wide open, just propped a little, as if someone had been looking at it and got interrupted. It was open to Chapter 7, Market Failures and Externalities. I stared at it. My mind immediately offered an explanation. You knocked it when you shot up in bed. You were half asleep. You don't remember. It made sense. It was the only thing that made sense. Get a grip, Ethan, I muttered to the empty room. My voice was rough. I felt like an idiot. I pushed the book closed with a decisive slap. The sound echoed in the quiet. I was letting a dream spook me. Pathetic. To prove to myself how okay I was, I decided to do something productive. Anything. Clean. Yeah, I'd clean. I started by picking up the trash on my desk. Crumpled papers, empty chip bags. A mechanical pencil had rolled off the edge. I bent down to pick it up from the floor, my fingers brushing against the dusty linoleum. And then they touched something else. It wasn't paper. It was thicker. Stiff. A small, square card. I pulled it out from under the lip of the desk, my breath caught in my throat. I didn't need to see the front. I knew the feel of it. The slightly glossy surface, the thick cardboard backing. I turned it over. My blood went cold. It was a Polaroid. Faded. The colors washed out by time. Me, maybe 3 years younger, arms slung around a girl with dark hair, and a smile that could stop traffic. Lynn. We were on the boardwalk at Santa Monica, the pier a blurry collection of lights behind us. Her head was tilted onto my shoulder. We looked happy. We looked like we thought this would last forever. This was not possible. This photo did not exist. I remembered the night we broke up, the shouting, the tears, the ceremonial purge afterwards. I had gathered every picture, every letter, every stupid memento, and I had burned them in a small cathartic bonfire in my backyard. I watched this exact photo curl, turn black and crumble into ash. I watched it become nothing. So what was I holding in my hand? What the hell? The whisper was hoarse. I wasn't talking to myself anymore. I was asking a question to the room, to whatever was in the room with me. My head snapped up. I scanned the four walls, my eyes wide, searching for something, anything, a sign, a clue. My gaze landed on the small TV I kept on my dresser. It was an old model my parents had given me, heavy and bulky. The screen was dark. A layer of dust covered its surface. It was not plugged into the wall. The cord lay coiled behind it like a dead snake. And then it turned on. There was no sound of power, no click or pop. 1 second it was a dark, dusty mirror. The next, it was a screen full of writhing, roaring static. A blizzard of black and white dots, hissing. The sound was immense, filling the small room, scraping at the inside of my skull. It was a physical pressure, a wall of white noise pushing in from all sides. I stood frozen, the Polaroid clutched in my fist. My heart wasn't just beating fast anymore. It was trying to hammer its way out of my chest. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a dream. This was happening. And through the roar of the static, another sound began to form. A voice. It was buried deep in the noise, distorted, as if being dragged through miles of rusted pipe and broken data. It was a whisper that was somehow also a scream. It said one word, a name. L-L-L-L-L-E-E-E-E-E-E-E-N-N-H-H-H. The name stretched, pulled apart like taffy, the digital hiss tearing it to shreds. L-L-L-L-I-I-I-I-I-N-N-H-H-H. It knew her name. The thing in my room knew her name. Chills exploded across my skin. 1,000 tiny needles. My eyes were locked on the unplugged television, on the storm of static. The voice was coming from the speaker. It was impossible. It was a violation of every law of physics I'd ever been taught. The photograph in my hand felt suddenly hot, toxic. This was the key. This was the invitation. Lynn, 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 Lynn. The loop of her name got faster, clearer, clawing its way out of the static. It was an incantation. A summons. Panic, pure and absolute, finally broke my paralysis. I let out a yell that was half air, half terror. My apathetic annoyance was a distant memory. This was raw, animal fear. It was in my house. It was in my room. Get out! I screamed at the TV. L-T-I-2, N-N-N-H-H. I threw the Polaroid. It fluttered to the floor, landing face up. Lynn's smiling face stared at the ceiling. It didn't matter. The voice wasn't coming from the picture. It was coming from the TV. I had to make it stop. I lunged for the dresser, my hands scrambling behind the television for the power cord. My fingers found it. Cold, dead plastic. I ripped it from the back of the set, tearing the prongs free with a violent jerk. The static didn't flicker. The hissing didn't quiet. The whispering of her name continued, relentless. Lynn. Lynn. Remember Lynn? It was mocking me. My mind went white. There was no thought, only action. My eyes darted around the room, looking for a weapon, for something heavy. My gaze fell on the desk. The Principles of Macroeconomics. The $200 paperweight. A perfect instrument for market failure. I snatched it. The book felt solid, righteous in my grip. I took 2 running steps and hurled it with every ounce of strength I had. The book spun, end over end, and hit the screen dead center. Crash! The sound was glorious. The screen imploded in a spiderweb of fractured glass. Shards flew across the room. A few of them peppered my face like sharp rain. For a single beautiful second, there was silence. The static was gone. But the voice wasn't. It was louder now, freed from the confines of the speaker. It wasn't just in front of me anymore. It was everywhere. It was a whisper directly into my left ear. It was a murmur from under the bed. It was a sigh from the corner behind me. The room itself was speaking. The walls were whispering her name. Lynn. A sharp, piercing pain erupted behind my eyes, as if a spike had been driven into my skull. The room tilted violently. The whispers swirled together into a deafening vortex of sound. My knees buckled. My hands flew to my head, trying to press the sound out, trying to hold my skull together. The floor rushed up to meet me. The last thing I saw was the happy, smiling face on the Polaroid, its colors seeming to brighten in the gloom before everything went black. My first sensation was the familiar lumpy texture of my comforter against my cheek. My head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. I groaned, rolling onto my back. I was in my bed. My eyes blinked open, adjusting to the dim light of the room. The curtains were drawn. Everything was quiet. The only sound was the low hum of the mini-fridge. Slowly, carefully, I sat up. The headache was real, a hangover from a terror binge. I looked around. The room was exactly as it had been. Desk a mess, laundry in a pile. My eyes shot to the dresser. The TV was there. The screen was perfect. Not a scratch on it. The power cord was coiled neatly behind it. My textbook, The Principles of Macroeconomics, was sitting on the desk, closed. I scanned the floor. The shards of glass were gone. The Polaroid was gone. It was a dream. It had to be. Another one. Deeper, more complex, more violent, but still just a dream. My brain was short-circuiting. The stress was literally making me smash up my own room in my sleep, or at least dream that I was. I felt a wave of dizzy relief, so strong it almost made me sick. I needed to talk to someone, a real person, my mom, Dave, anyone. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, my lifeline, my connection to the world outside these four walls. I picked it up. My thumb moved to unlock it. The screen lit up, and I stopped breathing. The wallpaper wasn't the default blue wave pattern anymore. It was a picture, a photograph. A faded Polaroid of a boy with his arm around a girl, a pier lit up behind them. Her head was tilted onto his shoulder. She was smiling. I was holding the impossible in my hand. It was a perfect, high-resolution scan of the photo. As my eyes widened in horror, I saw something else, something that hadn't been on the original. Scrawled across the bottom of the image, in what looked like red, digital ink, like a finger dragged across a bloody touchscreen, were 3 words. A question. Remember me? The phone fell from my hand, clattered on the floor. I didn't feel it leave. My nerves were shot, my fingers numb. My gaze was fixed on the space where the phone had been, but all I could see was that picture, that question. Remember me? My breath came in short, ragged bursts. The air in the room felt thick, used up. This wasn't a nightmare. It wasn't stress. A dream doesn't hack your phone. A dream doesn't dig up a photo you personally turned to ash and set it as your wallpaper. Something was in here with me. Or it could get in, anytime it wanted. It could touch my things. It could get inside my head. I had to get out. Not later, not after I calmed down. Now. The thought was a jolt of electricity. It bypassed reason, bypassed fear, and went straight to my legs. Scrambling off the bed, my feet tangled in the sheets. I nearly went down, catching myself on the edge of the desk. My movements were clumsy, jerky, an animal in a trap. I needed clothes, shoes, keys. My eyes scanned the room, a frantic search for the essentials of escape. A hoodie was balled up on my desk chair. I grabbed it, pulling it on over my sweaty t-shirt. The fabric felt abrasive, foreign. I shoved my bare feet into the sneakers I'd kicked off by the door hours ago, not bothering with socks. The cold rubber interior shocked my skin. Keys. Where were the keys? The hook by the door. That's where I always put them. It was a rule, the one single point of order in the chaos of my life. I lurched toward the door, my hand outstretched, fingers ready to snatch them off the hook. The hook was empty. No! The word was a choked whisper. I pawed at the wall, my fingers brushing against the bare metal hook, as if the keys might be invisible. Nothing. My heart, which was already hammering against my ribs, found a new, frantic rhythm. Think. Think, you idiot. Where else? My gaze shot around the room again. Pockets of the jeans on the floor? No jacket? I hadn't worn a jacket. Then my eyes landed on the desk. Next to the closed macroeconomics textbook, sitting on a stack of loose papers, was the small metallic glint of my key ring. The university lanyard attached to it was a splash of familiar blue. For a second, my panic stalled. I stared at them. I never left my keys on the desk, ever. The hook was a ritual, a muscle memory honed over a year of living here. Leaving them on the desk was like brushing my teeth with my left hand. It just didn't happen. You were freaked out. You came in, tossed them on the desk without thinking. You're losing it, that's all. The voice of reason in my head sounded weak, unconvincing. It was drowned out by a louder, more primal scream. It moved them. It put them there for you to find. I didn't care. I snatched the keys, the metal cold and solid in my trembling hand. It was real. It was my ticket out. I jammed the key into the lock, my fumbling fingers making the simple task a monumental struggle. The tumblers finally clicked. I turned the knob, yanked the door open, and threw myself into the doorway, ready to run. The sound hit me first, a wave of glorious, beautiful noise. From down the hall, the muffled thud-thud-thud of someone's bass-heavy music vibrated through the floor. I could hear 2 girls laughing, their voices high and clear, arguing about a professor. The squeak of sneakers on linoleum as someone walked past. It was the sound of life. The sound of a normal Tuesday night in a college dorm. Relief washed over me, so potent it made my knees weak. I wasn't alone. There were people just feet away. The world was still out there, safe and sane. Thank God, I breathed, a plume of white vapor in the cool hallway air. I took a step forward, across the threshold, out of my prison. My sneaker came down on the floor. The familiar, slightly sticky linoleum. My body followed, a lurching motion of pure momentum. I was out. I was free. I would run down this hall, bang on the first door I saw, and I wouldn't stop talking until I was sitting in a brightly lit campus security office. Except I wasn't in the hallway. The sense of wrongness was immediate, a physical blow. The air didn't feel right, the light was different. I had stepped through the doorway, but I hadn't stepped out. I stood, frozen, on the other side of my own room. My unmade bed was in front of me. To my left was the desk, the economics textbook sitting on it like a tombstone. To my right, the dresser with the dark, silent television. Behind me, where the wall of the hallway should have been, was the open door I had just stepped through. And through that door, I could see the other side of my room again. The desk, the bed, the dresser, a perfect, maddening mirror image. My mind refused to process it. It was like looking at one of those optical illusions where your brain can't decide which way the lines are supposed to go. I slowly turned my head back towards the doorway. The sounds were still there. The thudding bass, the laughing girls. They were so close. I could almost feel the vibrations in the air. This wasn't possible. With a surge of desperate hope, I spun around and stepped back through the door, back to where I started. I was standing in front of the lock again. I slammed the door shut. The sound was a loud, definitive bang in the confines of the room. Silence. The hum of the mini fridge was the only thing I could hear. The sounds from the hallway were gone. My hand was shaking so violently I could barely hold the doorknob. My skin was slick with a cold sweat. Okay. Just a trick of the mind. A waking dream. A hallucination brought on by extreme panic. I would open it again, and the hallway would be there. It had to be. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I counted to 3. I turned the knob and pulled the door open. The hallway. The sounds. The light. It was all there again, a perfect replica of the salvation I'd heard a moment before. The music, the laughter, everything. It was an invitation. No, I whispered. I didn't step through. I just leaned my head out, peering down the long, linoleum-tiled corridor. It looked real. It smelled real, like stale pizza and air freshener. A guy the first vaguely recognized from my English class walked past, headphones on, not even glancing in my direction. He was real. He was right there. My heart swelled with a fresh wave of hope. I was wrong. I was just seeing things. It was a panic attack. I put one foot out, planting it firmly on the hallway floor. Then, the other. I was standing fully outside my room. I turned around. Behind me was the open door to my room. In front of me was the long, blessedly normal hallway. I let out a laugh, a dry, cracking sound. I was losing my mind. Completely and utterly losing it. Idiot, I muttered, turning to start walking, to put as much distance between me and that room as possible. I took one step, and the world flipped. The movement was seamless, instantaneous. There was no dizziness, no sensation of travel. One moment, my foot was moving forward into the hallway. The next, it was landing on the worn carpet of my room, right next to my laundry pile. The hallway in front of me vanished, replaced by the familiar water-stained wall. The door slammed shut behind me with a click that echoed in the sudden, crushing silence. I was back inside. The trap wasn't the room. The trap was the door. A scream tore itself from my throat, raw and ragged. No, no! I lunged at the door, twisting the knob, yanking it open. The hallway appeared again. The sounds flooded in, louder this time, more cheerful. A cacophony of normal life that was now the most sadistic torture I could imagine. It was a paradise I could see and hear, but never enter. "Let me out!" I screamed, my voice cracking. I stepped through the door frame again. And again, I found myself standing on the far side of my own room, staring at the bed. The door was behind me, an open gateway to nowhere. I didn't hesitate. I spun and went back through. Slammed it shut. Opened it again. Stepped through. Landed by the desk. Back. Shut. Open. Step. Landed by the dresser. It was a game. A sick, twisted game. and the rules were becoming clear. The door was a revolving one, and every exit was another entrance. The sounds from the hallway never changed. They were a recording of a world I was no longer part of. The laughter of the girls outside felt like a personal insult. The thud of the bass was a hammer blow to my sanity. "Help!" I shrieked, my fists pounding against the solid wood of the door. "Help me! I'm in here!" My knuckles were raw, splinters dug into my skin. I didn't care. "Can't you hear me?" The laughter outside continued, uninterrupted. The bass didn't miss a beat. They couldn't hear me, or they weren't real. I didn't know which was worse. I pressed my ear to the door, listening past the ghost sounds. I listened for a footstep to pause, for a voice to say, "Did you hear that?" For anything. There was nothing. Just the loop. The party I wasn't invited to. Rage, pure and white-hot, burned through the fear. It was a clean, sharp feeling. I was done playing the game. I was done being the rat in the maze. If the door wouldn't let me out, I would make my own. I backed away from it, my eyes never leaving the simple wooden rectangle that had become my tormentor. I backed up until my shoulders hit the opposite wall. The room felt small, a shoebox ready to be crushed. My breath was a roaring in my ears. The sounds from the phantom hallway were a distant, tinny irritation. There was no more thought, no more planning. There was only the door. And me. I lowered my shoulder. I bent my knees. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the stale, recycled air of my prison. And I ran. My feet pounded against the floor. 3 steps. The desk was a blur. The bed was a blur. All that existed was the grain of the wood on the door. My target. I threw every ounce of my weight, my fear, my fury, into the impact. Crack! The sound was not a sound. It was an explosion, a physical force that ripped through the air. The wood didn't just splinter, it shattered. The middle of the door blew outwards in a shower of jagged pieces. The frame groaned, twisted. For a glorious, beautiful second, I was airborne, flying through the space where the door had been. I landed hard, tumbling onto a floor that wasn't carpet or linoleum. It was nothing. I crashed into a perfect, silent darkness. The impact knocked the wind out of me. I lay on my side, gasping, my cheek pressed against a surface that was cool and smooth and blessedly solid. I was out. The silence was total. The hallway sounds were gone. The hum of the fridge was gone. It was the silence of a vacuum, dark and empty. I had done it. I had broken the loop. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest. A sharp pain shot through my shoulder. I didn't care. I was free. I got to my knees, then shakily to my feet, my arms held out in front of me, feeling my way through the blackness. Then, a single, sharp click echoed in the void. A light flickered on above me. A bare, yellow bulb. It illuminated the room. My room. I was standing in the exact center of it. The unmade bed, the messy desk, the silent TV. My heart stopped. My eyes darted to the door. It stood there, whole and untouched. The paint was unchipped. The knob was gleaming. There wasn't a single scratch on it. It was perfect. Impossible. I had destroyed it. I felt the splinters in my fists. I felt the impact in my bones. My gaze dropped from the impossible door to the floor. There, on the worn carpet, right where I was standing, scattered around my feet, was a small pile of debris. Jagged, sharp splinters of wood, smelling of varnish and fresh, raw breakage. The door I had just destroyed was whole, and the proof of its destruction lay at my feet. The splinters were real. I could feel their sharp edges against my fingers as I crouched on the floor. I picked one up, a jagged piece of wood, coated in the same cheap white paint as the door. It smelled like fresh pine and old secrets. My shoulder throbbed with a deep, grinding ache from the impact. The pain was real. The splinters were real. I looked from the proof of destruction in my hand to the thing that stared back at me, the door. It stood there, perfect. Not a scratch. Not a dent. The metal knob gleamed under the single yellow bulb. It was a silent, mocking testament to my failure. I had thrown myself against it with everything I had. I broke it. I flew through it. And the room simply reset itself around me, leaving the evidence of my futile rage scattered at my feet like confetti at a funeral. This is real. The thought wasn't a panic anymore. It was a cold, heavy stone settling in my gut. Not a dream. Not a breakdown. This is happening. My body moved without my permission. It was slow, stiff, an old man's shuffle. I pushed myself up, my joints screaming. I didn't look at the door again. I couldn't. I stumbled to the bed and collapsed onto it, the springs groaning under my dead weight. I stared at the ceiling. The familiar water stain looked like a map to a country I never wanted to visit. I had to get help. The thought was a flicker in the vast darkness of my mind. The screams were useless. The brute force was useless. But maybe the trap had a loophole. It controlled the physical space, the door, the walls. But what about the things that weren't physical? What about the signals? But my phone. It was on the floor where I dropped it earlier. No, not dropped it. Where it fell. Hours ago? Minutes ago? I had no idea. I leaned over the edge of the bed, my hand shaking as I picked it up. The screen lit up under my thumb. The cracked spiderweb pattern from 100 previous drops was still there. A normal broken phone. My wallpaper, the same picture. The question. Remember me? It felt less like a threat now, and more like a simple statement of fact from whatever was running this show. My finger hovered over the phone icon. This was insane. What, was I going to call 911? Hello, police. My dorm room won't let me leave. The door is a metaphysical revolving portal to hell. They'd send a campus wellness officer with a tranquilizer dart. No, not 911. Someone close. Someone who could come to the door. Someone on the other side of this wall. Nate, my best friend. His room was directly across the hall. 2B. I was in 2A. He was probably 10 feet away from me right now, separated by a wall, a phantom hallway, and an unknowable horror. My thumb moved, almost on its own. I tapped his name in my contacts. A wave of hope, so powerful and so stupid, washed through me. This would work. It had to work. The room could play with light and space, but it couldn't hijack the goddamn cell towers, could it? Put the phone to my ear. The digital ringing sound filled my head. Once. Twice. Each ring was a lifetime. My entire being was focused on that sound, praying for it to be interrupted by a familiar, living voice. Yo! The voice came through, clear and normal. It was Nate. The sound was so blessedly ordinary it almost made me cry. The knot of ice in my stomach loosened, just a fraction. Nate! I gasped, my voice a dry croak. Nate, thank God, you have to help me. Whoa, Alex, slow down. You sound like you just ran a marathon. What's up? Listen to me, I said, stumbling over the words, my brain struggling to assemble the chaos into a coherent sentence. Something's wrong. Something's wrong with my room. The door, I can't get out. I open it, I see the hallway, I hear you guys, but when I step through, I just end up back inside. It's a loop, man. I'm not crazy. It's a goddamn loop. I was babbling, but I couldn't stop. The relief of hearing his voice was a dam breaking. I tried to break it down. I smashed the door, Nate. I swear to God, I smashed it to pieces, and it just put itself back together. You have to get me out. Call campus security. Kick the door in from your side. Do something. There was a pause on the other end, not a long one, just a beat of silence that felt heavier than my entire speech. The hum of my mini-fridge seemed to get louder, filling the space Nate's voice had just occupied. Then he spoke. His tone was different. Calm, confused. Dude, what are you talking about? He said. I'm in your room right now. My blood went cold. I stopped breathing. The phone felt slick and heavy in my hand. What? The word was a whisper. I'm in your room, man, he repeated, his voice flat. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at it. Then my eyes shot around the small space. My unmade bed, the overloaded desk, the dresser, the laundry piled in the corner. The room was empty. It was just me. Me and the silent, perfect door. That's not funny, Nate, I said, my voice trembling, the earlier relief curdling into a new, sharp-edged fear. I'm looking around right now. There's nobody here. I'm alone. A sound came through the phone's speaker, a chuckle. But it wasn't Nate's laugh. Nate had a goofy, loud laugh that made you laugh with him. This was a dry, hollow sound, a sound from the back of the throat. It was the sound of a predator enjoying the fear of its prey. "You're not looking in the right place," the voice said. It was still Nate's voice, but the edges were wrong, like a recording played on a warped tape. "Where are you?" I demanded, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. My gaze darted around frantically. Under the bed? Behind the curtain? The voice on the phone was low, almost a murmur, but it carried across the line with perfect, chilling clarity. "Look at the closet!" My head snapped towards it. The tall, cheap particle board closet stood against the far wall, its brown facade absorbing the weak light. It was just a closet. A box for my clothes. I'd opened it 1,000 times, but now it felt like a coffin standing on its end. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was paralyzed, my eyes locked on the two simple brass knobs. And then I heard it. A sound. A low, wooden creak. It came from the phone in my hand, a tiny, tinny noise. And at the exact same instant, it came from across the room. A real, physical groan of old hinges. My eyes widened. The right-hand door of the closet was moving. It opened slowly, not with a swing, but with a deliberate, smooth pull from the inside. A crack of vertical darkness appeared. It widened. An inch. 2 inches. A sliver of absolute black in the dim yellow light of the room. It stopped, leaving a gap just wide enough for someone to peer out. A new sound came through the phone, the sound of a quiet intake of breath, amplified as if the microphone was pressed right against someone's lips. And then, the voice. It wasn't speaking into a phone anymore. It was a whisper, intimate and close, crawling directly into my ear. "See me yet?" A scream, high and animal, tore from my throat. I didn't think. I reacted. My arm shot out and I hurled the phone with all my strength. It smashed against the wall beside the closet, the screen exploding in a starburst of glass and plastic before it clattered to the floor, dead and silent. The connection was broken, but the closet door was still open. Rage and terror lit my nerves on fire. I was a caged animal. I launched myself off the bed. I wasn't running away. I was attacking. My bare feet pounded on the carpet. 2 steps, and I was there. I threw my entire body weight against the closet door, slamming it shut with a loud bang. I didn't stop there. I pressed my shoulder, my hip, my entire side against the wood. My hands flattened against the surface, fingers splayed, pushing. I braced myself, my muscles screaming. My teeth gritted so hard my jaw ached. I was ready for the fight, ready for the thing inside, to push back, to rattle the door, to claw at the wood. Nothing. There was no resistance, no sound, just the solid, unyielding pressure of my own body against a cheap piece of furniture. The silence that followed was louder than my own scream had been. It pressed in on me, thick and heavy. I stayed there for a long time. Minutes. I don't know how many. My breathing was ragged, harsh in the quiet room. My heart slowly hammered its way back down from my throat into my chest. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving behind a shaky, profound exhaustion. There was nothing inside. The thought was almost as terrifying as the alternative. Slowly, cautiously, I relaxed the pressure. My muscles unwound, trembling from the strain. I took a step back, my hand still hovering near the door, ready to slam it shut again. The door didn't move. It stayed closed. My eyes were still locked on it. I had to know. I had to be sure. My hand, shaking violently, reached out. My fingers touched the cool brass knob. I turned it. I pulled. The door swung open smoothly, without a sound. I flinched back, half expecting something to leap out at me. But the closet was just a closet. My hoodies and jackets were crammed onto the rail. A pile of shoes sat on the floor. It smelled of laundry detergent and dust. It was normal. It was empty. My breath rushed out of me in a ragged sigh of relief. A hallucination. It had to be. The phone call, the voice, the door moving, a waking nightmare brought on by sheer terror. My mind was breaking. That was the only answer. I let my gaze drift over my clothes, the familiar sight a small anchor in a sea of madness. My blue hoodie, a black jacket, a row of t-shirts. And there, hanging in the middle, was the white button-down shirt my mom had made me buy for an interview I never went to. It was clean, pressed. I hadn't touched it in months. Except it wasn't clean anymore. Right in the center of the chest, stark against the pristine white cotton, was a handprint. It wasn't paint. It wasn't ink. It was a perfect, 5-fingered smear of thick, black, greasy dirt. The lines of the palm and the whorls of the fingertips were clear, as if someone had dipped their hand in oil and soot and then calmly, deliberately pressed it against my shirt. A mark, left just for me. I stood there, frozen, staring at it, the proof, the evidence. The trap wasn't just playing with my mind. It wasn't just the door. It could get in anywhere. It could get into my locked closet. It could touch my things. And it was filthy. The world blinked. I was on the bed. The greasy handprint on the white shirt in the closet was gone. My phone was back on the nightstand, its screen intact, mocking me with its silent, dark face. The splinters from the door I had smashed to pieces were gone. The ache in my shoulder was gone. The fear was not. It had changed. The wild, screaming panic was a fire that had burned itself out, leaving behind cold, hard coals of something else. Resolve. I was not going to scream again. I was not going to hurl myself against the door again. That was what it wanted. It fed on my panic. It enjoyed my futile rage. No more. This was a game. A sick, twisted game with rules I didn't know. My new job was to figure them out. I sat perfectly still on the edge of the mattress, my hands resting on my knees. I became a camera, recording, observing. I let my eyes drift slowly, deliberately, around the small space, the coffee cup on my desk. White ceramic, a small chip on the rim, right at the 12 o'clock position. Handle pointing to the right, towards the window. I burned the image into my memory, the stack of textbooks next to it. 3 of them. Biology on top, then history, then philosophy on the bottom. The corner of the biology cover was slightly bent. I memorized the angle of the dog ear, the dark green comforter on my bed, the wrinkles. I traced them with my eyes. A deep crease running from the top left corner down towards the center, 2 smaller folds branching off it, like a river delta. I knew these wrinkles. I had been staring at them for I don't know how long. Everything was exactly as it should be, the starting position, the reset point. My rage had done nothing. My phone call had been turned into a weapon against me. Physical escape was impossible. Communication was a trap. So what was left? Observation. Find the flaw. Find the seam. There had to be one. Some small detail that it got wrong. Some tell. My gaze continued its slow sweep. The laundry pile in the corner. The blinds on the window, one slat bent. The worn patch on the carpet next to the bed. I knew it all. It was my cage, but I knew every bar, every speck of rust. I lifted my head. The ceiling, a blank white textured canvas. Featureless, perfect. I had looked at it 100 times, 1,000 times. There was the familiar water stain near the window, the one that looked like a map of a country I never wanted to visit. But the rest of it, nothing. Just white. My eyes scanned a corner of the room, near the closet. Just white on white. I followed the line where the ceiling met the wall. Everything was clean. Normal. I blinked. My eyes returned to the corner. And I froze. There was a line. It was impossibly thin, a single dark hair lying on the white paint. No, not lying on it. It was a part of it. A crack, as fine as a spider's thread, branching out in a tiny, chaotic starburst. It couldn't have been more than an inch long. But it wasn't there before. My heart didn't leap. It just stopped. A cold, heavy weight dropped in my stomach. The memory of the black, greasy handprint flashed in my mind. That was a change. A mark left behind. This was different. This wasn't something added. This was the room itself. Breaking. I stared, unblinking, willing it to disappear, willing my mind to have invented it. A trick of the light. An eye floater. Please be an eye floater. But it stayed. Sharp. Definite. Real. A structural change. My breath hitched. The carefully constructed calm I had built around myself began to fracture. This was new. This wasn't a reset to a perfect state. This was an evolution. As I watched, my mind screaming denial, the impossible happened. It grew. It wasn't fast. It was a slow, deliberate creep. The main line of the crack extended, a black pen being drawn across the white ceiling by an unseen hand. It moved with a quiet, sickening purpose. A low grinding sound reached my ears, the sound of stone on stone, of pressure building deep within the walls. It snaked its way out of the corner, heading for the center of the room, heading directly for the space above my head. A small branch shot off to the side, then another. The spider web was growing, expanding. It was alive, a network of black veins spreading through the white skin of the room. Crack! The sound was sharp, like a knuckle popping, but it echoed in the small space. A tiny shower of white dust and debris, no bigger than grains of sand, rained down, dusting my hair and shoulders. I flinched, scrambling back on the bed, my camera-like detachment completely shattered. This wasn't a flaw in the reset. This was the next stage of the torture. "What do you want?" I whispered, the words rasping in my dry throat. The crack answered me by speeding up. It crawled across the ceiling, a living wound, the grinding noise getting louder, more insistent. It was right above me now. The intricate pattern of black lines spread out like a monstrous canopy. It was no longer a crack. It was a shattering. I threw myself off the bed. My feet hit the worn carpet, and I stumbled backwards, my eyes glued to the horror above. I backed away until my shoulders hit the cold, solid wood of the door that was no escape. I was trapped between a lie and an unraveling truth. The grinding grew into a groaning protest. The entire ceiling seemed to sag, bowing under an immense, invisible weight. More dust rained down. Larger flakes of paint fluttered to the ground like diseased snow. My eyes locked onto the center of the web, directly above the spot on the bed where I had been sitting just seconds ago. It was getting darker, the plaster was crumbling. A shadow was growing from within. With a final, deafening crunch, it gave way. A huge chunk of plaster and drywall, maybe 2 feet wide, ripped free from the ceiling and fell. It crashed down onto the bed with a heavy, sickening whump right where my head had been. The bed spring shrieked. A cloud of white dust exploded outwards, filling the air with a choking haze. I stared, gasping, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. A hole, a ragged black hole now gaped in my ceiling. It was a maw of perfect darkness, a window into nothing. And then I heard a new sound. Tick. It was quiet, almost lost in the ringing in my ears. Tick. My eyes focused on the hole. From the absolute blackness inside, a single drop of liquid was forming. It grew, swelled, and clung to the ragged edge of broken drywall, reflecting the room's yellow light on its black, oily surface. Tick. It let go. It fell through the dusty air in a perfect, slow-motion arc, and landed on the dark green comforter. It didn't splash. It sizzled. A tiny wisp of acrid smoke curled up from the fabric. Another drop was already forming. Tick. The world blinked. I was on the bed. My body was rigid, every muscle locked. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My head snapped up. The ceiling. It was perfect. White. Clean. The familiar water stain was in its place by the window. There was no crack. There was no hole. There was no spiderweb of black veins. It was pristine, unbroken. A wave of dizzying vertigo washed over me. Did I imagine it? Was the stress finally making my mind snap completely? A hallucination born of terror? The closet, the phone call, now the ceiling. I lowered my gaze slowly, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. I looked at the dark green comforter. It was smooth. The wrinkles were different now, but there was no hole, no burn mark, nothing. Relief and terror fought a war inside my skull. Maybe it wasn't real. Maybe I was just losing my mind. That was a terrifying thought, but it was better than the alternative. My feet swung off the bed. They touched the floor. I stood up, my legs trembling. I needed to walk. I needed to prove I was still in control of my own body. I took a step towards the center of the room. I stopped. I looked down. There, on the worn wooden floorboards, exactly where the chunk of ceiling would have fallen if it had missed the bed. A puddle. It was no bigger than my palm. A pool of thick, black, glistening liquid. It wasn't just sitting there, it was moving. Small, sluggish bubbles rose to the surface and popped, releasing thin tendrils of greasy, gray smoke. The smoke didn't rise. It seemed heavy, slithering across the floorboards before dissipating. A low hissing sound came from it, and the wood around the edges of the liquid was dark and wet, stained as if by acid. It was steamy. It was real. And it smelled. A sharp chemical stench of burnt plastic and something foul, something like old rotten meat. The reset had missed something. Or it hadn't missed it. It had left it. A gift. A souvenir from the last loop. Proof. The trap wasn't just resetting anymore. It was leaking. And it was leaving filth behind in my cage. The room wasn't just a prison. It was becoming a sewer. I ran. I didn't think. I just ran. My feet pounded against the floorboards, past the obscene black puddle that sizzled and smoked, and I slammed the bathroom door shut behind me. I twisted the cheap lock. A useless gesture. I knew it was useless. But my body needed to do something, anything, to feel a flicker of control. I leaned my back against the wood, my chest heaving. The chemical, rotten meat smell was fainter in here, but it was still in my nostrils, a ghost on the air. Control. That was the game now. Not escape. Control. I stumbled toward the sink. The porcelain was cold and solid under my trembling hands. I twisted the faucet. The gush of water was a real sound in a world of impossible noises. I cupped my hands, splashed the cold water on my face. Once. Twice. The shock of it was a grounding force. It was real. Cold water. Wet skin. My reflection stared back at me from the cheap builder-grade mirror. God, I looked like hell. My face was pale, drawn. Dark circles pooled under my eyes like bruises. My hair was a wreck. A stranger was staring back at me. A victim. The thought made a fresh wave of anger roll through me. No, I wouldn't be a victim. I focused. Breathe in. Breathe out. The puddle is out there. The ceiling is fixed. Those things happened. They are real. The reset isn't perfect anymore. It leaves things behind. It leaves scars. That's a weakness. That is a clue. I stared hard at my reflection, trying to see the man I was before this room started eating me alive. Just a guy. A guy who worked a boring job, who liked pizza on Fridays, who was saving up for a better apartment. That guy was dying. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the glass for a second. The man in the mirror looked tired, defeated. I forced my expression to harden. No more. The fear was a tool it used. I wouldn't give it the satisfaction. I splashed my face again, the water dripping from my chin into the basin. A small, familiar sound. I let the water run, a constant hiss that filled the small room. I kept my eyes closed for a second longer than I needed to, just gathering myself. Then I looked up. The man in the mirror was smiling. It wasn't my smile. My own face was a mask of cold shock, my mouth slightly agape, water dripping from my nose. But him, the other me trapped in the silver, he was smiling. It was a slow, creeping thing. It started at the corner of his lips, a tiny, almost imperceptible twitch. I blinked, sure it was a trick of the light, a distortion in the cheap glass. But it grew. The smile stretched across his face, pulling the skin taut over his cheekbones. It was a wide, predatory grin that showed too much teeth. There was no warmth in it, no humor. The eyes above the smile were my eyes, but they were wrong. They were flat, knowing, and filled with a cold, ancient amusement. My blood ran cold, my breath hitched in my throat. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was frozen, a statue of a man staring at his own monstrous double. What the hell is this? What new game was this? What was kashist a? Slowly, I took one step back. My bare foot made a soft sound on the linoleum floor. The thing in the mirror stepped back too, perfectly in sync. Its sick smile never wavered. Okay? Okay. It's just a reflection. My mind is snapping. That's all. The puddle. The ceiling. It's too much. I'm hallucinating. It's not real. I had to test it. I had to prove it. With a hand that shook so badly I could barely control it, I lifted my right arm. I held it up, palm facing forward. A gesture of surrender. Or a test. A plea. I don't know what it was. The reflection raised its right arm. For a terrifying second, it was a perfect mirror. Then, its fingers curled, its hand tilted, and with a slow, deliberate grace that was 1,000 times more horrifying than any sudden movement, it waved at me. A casual, friendly little wave. Hello there. The smiling mouth didn't move. The cold eyes never left mine. A sound tore from my throat, a strangled gasp that was half scream. What do you want? I whispered, the words barely audible over the hissing faucet. The reflection's smile widened even further, a gruesome crescent in its face. It didn't answer. It just slowly lowered its waving hand. I screamed for real this time. A raw, ragged sound of pure animal terror. I threw myself back, hitting the bathroom door with a thud that rattled the frame. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. In the mirror, the other me opened its mouth. It opened it wide, impossibly wide, like a snake unhinging its jaw. A silent, black void. It mimicked my scream, but not a single sound came out. It was stealing my terror, swallowing it whole. Its shoulders shook in a silent, mocking laugh. This wasn't a hallucination. This was an attack. It started to lean forward. Its face moved closer to the surface of the mirror, the features distorting as they pressed against the invisible barrier. Its wide, amused eyes were locked on me, pinning me to the door. Its forehead touched the glass, its nose flattened. Its smiling lips smeared against the silvered surface, leaving a faint, greasy print. It was trying to get out. It was trying to push its way through the glass into my world, into my space. I was trapped. The door behind me was a lie. The thing in front of me was a nightmare made real. The walls of the tiny bathroom felt like they were shrinking, pressing in on me. I could hear my own ragged breathing, the frantic pumping of my heart, the endless hiss of the running water, and the awful, profound silence from the thing in the mirror. No, no more. Not cowering, not screaming, not waiting. A surge of pure, white-hot rage flooded my system, drowning the fear. It was a chemical reaction, a primal choice. Fight. I lunged forward. I didn't think, I just acted. I threw my entire body weight into it, my right arm cocked back. The reflection lunged too, its smiling face a mask of victory. It thought it had won. My fist connected with its smiling mouth. The sound was an explosion in the tiny room. A deafening crack that was both glass and bone. The mirror didn't just break, it detonated. A spiderweb of fractures erupted from my fist, and then the entire surface gave way in a waterfall of silver shards. They rained down into the sink, chattering and clinking like broken ice. A piece sliced my cheek. I felt the warm sting, the trickle of blood. My fist was a mess of blood and pain. Sharp, agonizing pain that was beautiful and real. I had done something. I had fought back. I stared at the wall where the mirror had been. There was just cheap, stained drywall. The smiling face was gone. The thing was gone. I had broken it. I had won. I stood there, panting, my knuckles screaming, blood dripping from my chin and my hand onto the floor. The hissing water from the faucet was the only sound. I won. Blink. The world blinked. I was standing in front of the sink. My body was perfectly still. My back was straight. The door behind me was closed, but I wasn't leaning on it. The hiss of the faucet was gone. Silence. My heart hammered in my chest. No, 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 no. The vertiginous feeling of the reset washed over me, the sickening lurch of reality being rewritten. But the memory was sharp. The smile, the wave, the shatter, the pain. I looked down at my right hand. It was pale, clean, no blood, no cuts, not a single red mark on the knuckles. I flexed my fingers. No pain. I touched my cheek. The skin was smooth. No slice. No sting. It hadn't happened. My mind, finally, completely snapped. It was a full-blown psychotic break. The relief was so immense it almost brought me to my knees, but it was followed by a dread just as deep. What was worse, a haunted room or a broken mind? I lifted my head, my eyes drawn with a fatalistic certainty to the wall above the sink. The mirror was there. Perfect. Whole. Not a scratch on it. It gleamed under the single light bulb, casting a clean, sterile reflection of me in the little room back at myself. My own face, wide-eyed and terrified, stared out. There was no smile. There was no mocking wave. There was just me. Alone. I let out a shuddering breath that was half a sob. It was a dream. A hallucination. I was okay. The room was playing with my mind, but it hadn't. My eyes focused. Something was wrong. On the surface of the glass. Right in the center. Right where I had punched it. A flaw. It was small. You could miss it if you weren't looking. A tiny, complex web of lines etched into the glass. They were as fine as hairs. They branched out from a central point. They formed the unmistakable shape of a closed fist. A perfect, miniature fossil of my rage. It wasn't a hallucination. It had happened. The room had reset, but it remembered. It had kept a souvenir. And as I stared, transfixed, my blood turning to ice in my veins, a single black drop began to form in the very center of the fish-shaped crack. It welled up from an impossible depth within the glass, a bead of glossy, black tar. It grew, swelled, reflecting the yellow light of the bathroom in its oily surface. It trembled for a moment, clinging to the glass. Then it let go. It didn't fall. It oozed, a thick, black tear that traced a slow, greasy path down the perfect surface of the mirror, leaving a stained, dark trail in its wake. It was the same liquid from the puddle, the same filth from the ceiling. The trap wasn't just leaking anymore, it was bleeding. I slid down the bathroom wall until my tailbone hit the linoleum floor. My legs wouldn't hold me anymore. My back was pressed against the door I couldn't open, the one that was a lie. In front of me, the sink dripped. My own blood mixed with water, swirling into a pink cloud before vanishing down the drain. The black tear, it was still there on the mirror, a dark, ugly line against the silver, a single, defiant proof that my fist, my rage, had been real. It hadn't been a dream. The room had fixed the broken glass, but had kept the evidence. It had kept the wound. A new thought cut through the fog of terror. A cold, sharp thought. It's playing with me. This isn't just a random glitch in reality. This is a game. It has rules. Twisted, impossible rules, but rules nonetheless. It resets. It cleans up. But it makes mistakes. It leaves scars. The terror. The faint smell of rot still clinging to the air. The memory of a smile that wasn't mine. Control. I lost it. I screamed. I punched. I gave it the reaction it wanted. This time would be different. I had to understand the game board. I had to know the cycle. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest. I stumbled out of the bathroom. The main room was exactly as it always was. Bed neatly made, a single book on the nightstand, the armchair in the corner, and on the far wall, a cheap plastic clock. The kind you buy at a drugstore for $10. It was white, with a yellow face and simple black numbers. I looked at it. 10 p.m. The long, thin second hand swept around its face with a soft, almost inaudible click. Time. That was the one thing I hadn't tracked. I'd been so lost in the chaos, in the changes, that I never measured the cage itself. How long did it last? A few minutes? An hour? I dragged the heavy armchair from the corner and placed it directly in the center of the room. I sat down, facing the clock. My hands gripped the armrests. My knuckles were white. "Okay," I whispered into the silence. My voice was a dry rasp. "Let's see what you've got." I would not move. I would not react. I would just watch. I would watch the clock. I would time the loop. That was my new purpose. That was my new anchor. I focused all my attention on that thin red line sweeping in its perfect circle. Click, click, click. The sound was a metronome, counting down to my own personal doom. Each second that passed felt like a small victory. 10:11 p.m. Nothing happened. The room was still. The air was heavy. I could hear my own heart hammering against my ribs, a chaotic drumbeat against the steady rhythm of the clock. Click, click, click. 10:12 p.m. My eyes started to burn from staring. I didn't blink. I was afraid I'd miss it. Afraid that in that split second of darkness, the reset would happen. Click, click. The sound stopped. The red second hand was frozen, pointing at the 6. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. A deep, profound void where a sound should have been. My entire body went rigid. This is it. But the world didn't blink. The room didn't reset. Then the second hand moved. Not forward, talk. It jerked backward. From the 6 to the 5, talk. From the 5 to the 4. My breath caught in my throat. What the hell? I watched, mesmerized, as the hand continued its impossible journey. Talk, talk, talk. It was moving against time, a frantic, stuttering retreat. Then the minute hand shuddered. With a low groan of stressed plastic, it began to creep backward as well. 10:11 p.m., 10:10 p.m. The hour hand followed, slowly being dragged back from its position past the 10. The clock wasn't just broken, it was rewinding. A sound from the bathroom made me jump. A wet, slithering noise. I tore my eyes from the clock and looked toward the bathroom door. The black tear on the mirror, it was moving. It was crawling back up the glass. Against gravity, a thick, dark slug of liquid retracting its trail, leaving clean, perfect glass behind it. It reached the center, the fist-shaped crack I had made, and with a final sickening gulp, it vanished back inside the mirror. The fine, web-like cracks shimmered for a second, then sealed themselves, knitting together until the surface was flawless once more. The room wasn't just resetting. It was unhappening. My gaze snapped to the floor where the black puddle had been. The stains sizzled, shrinking inward. The edges pulled back from the floorboards, the rotten liquid receding into a single, central point before winking out of existence with a faint pop. The smell of decay vanished with it. It's cleaning up, I thought, a wave of cold dread washing over me. It's erasing its mistakes. The sound of splintering wood, but played in reverse. A high-pitched, whining shriek. I looked at the main door. The gouges and cracks from my earlier frantic attempts to escape were vanishing. Wood fibers wove themselves back together. Splinters flew from the floor and re-embedded themselves in the frame. In seconds, the door was pristine, the lock unbroken. This wasn't a reset, this was a rewind. A full, complete, physical reversal. It was correcting every flaw, every scar, every piece of evidence. And as that realization dawned, a new, more horrifying one slammed into me. If it was rewinding the room, my body jerked. It wasn't my own movement. It was a violent marionette pull. My arms, clenched on the chair, were yanked backward. My feet scraped against the floor as I was dragged out of the armchair, my body forced upright against my will. A scream bubbled up in my throat, but my jaw was clenched tight, my own muscles working against me. I was being pulled backward, retracing my steps. One leg lifted, then the other. A clumsy, horrifying parody of walking. I was being moved across the room, away from the clock, back toward the bathroom. No, I fought it. I strained with every ounce of my being, trying to throw myself to the floor, to break the sequence. It was like fighting a tide made of steel. My muscles burned, screaming in protest, but they were not mine to command. My body was a recording being played in reverse, and my consciousness was just a terrified spectator trapped inside. My hand was forced up, my fingers uncurled. I watched in absolute horror as my palm moved toward the bathroom wall, then slid down it, perfectly mimicking the motion I'd made when I collapsed just minutes before. My legs were kicked out from under me, and I fell back, landing on the linoleum with a soft thud. The rewind didn't stop. A new force took over. I was being pulled to my feet again. This time, the motion was smoother. I was walked out of the bathroom, my body moving backward with a grace I didn't possess. I was steered past the armchair, which was now sliding back to its original corner on its own, and taken directly to the bed. I was being put back. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just a reset. It was a correction. I wasn't supposed to be up. I wasn't supposed to be watching. I was supposed to be in bed, where the loop began. My body was turned around. My knees buckled. I was forced to sit on the edge of the mattress. My hands planted themselves behind me. I tried to yell, to bite my own tongue, to do anything to prove I was still here, still in charge. But nothing worked. I was a passenger in my own flesh. The rewind was almost complete. It was forcing me down, back against the pillow. My head was the last thing to move. The force on me was immense, pushing my head back, back, back. My eyes were locked on the clock on the far wall. The hands were spinning backward furiously now, a blurry whirlwind of red and black. They spun faster and faster until they both snapped perfectly into place. The long hand on the 12, the short hand on the 10. 10:10 p.m. My head hit the pillow. Blink. The world blinked. I was lying in bed. My body was still. The pressure was gone. The invisible strings had been cut. I could move. I could breathe. The air in my lungs felt like my own again. The sheets were cool against my skin. Silence. The sick, lurching feeling of the reset washed over me, but this time it was different. It wasn't a jump cut. It was the end point of a horrifying journey I had been forced to take. The memory was burned into my mind, the clock running backward, the room healing itself, the feeling of my own body turning against me. It was the most profound violation yet. It stripped me of the one thing I had left, my own agency. It had shown me that I wasn't just a prisoner in this room. I was a prop, a doll to be placed back in its box when playtime was over. A sob of pure, helpless rage escaped my lips. I pushed myself up, my body trembling. I had to see, I had to know. My eyes shot to the far wall, to the cheap plastic clock. It was there, hanging in its usual spot. The yellowed white plastic gleamed faintly in the dim light. The black numbers were sharp and clear. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 12. But the center of the clock was empty. There were no hands, no hour hand, no minute hand, no thin red second hand. There was just a blank white face. A smooth, perfect circle with a tiny, empty hole in the middle, where time used to be. The room hadn't just rewound itself. It had learned. I had tried to measure it, to understand it using time. So it had taken time away. I didn't move. I didn't scream. I just sat on the edge of the bed, my hands limp in my lap. The echo of the violation was a cold hum in my bones. My body had been a puppet. The room had pulled my strings, forced me back into my starting position, and then wiped the board clean. It had taken away the clock. It had taken away time. What was the point of fighting? What was the point of anything? If I screamed, it would erase the sound. If I broke something, it would heal the wound. If I moved, it would pull me back. I was a figurine in a demented dollhouse, and the owner had just finished tidying up. All I could do was wait for the next game, wait for the next change. Defeat was a heavy blanket, and I pulled it over my head. My eyes stared at the floorboards without seeing them. My mind was a flat, gray line. A flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. No, not movement. Just something my eyes slid over. Something that wasn't part of the usual map of the room burned into my memory. My gaze, slow and heavy, drifted down. Under the bed, there was always a small gap between the bed frame and the floor. An empty, dusty space. Now, it wasn't empty. Something was there, tucked just inside the shadow of the box spring. It was white, with streaks of brown. I stared, my brain refusing to process the shape. It was alien. It didn't belong. I leaned forward just an inch. The light from the single bulb overhead caught it. It was a shoe. A single sneaker, the kind a kid would wear. It was small. The white rubber toe was scuffed and yellowed. The canvas sides were stained with what looked like dried mud. One of the laces was untied, its frayed end a limp worm on the dusty floor. It wasn't my shoe. Hadn't owned a shoe like that in 30 years. A part of my mind, the part that was still screaming somewhere deep inside, wanted to panic, wanted to ask how, why. But it was like trying to start a car with a dead battery. There was no energy for it. The room changed things. This was a change. It had taken away the clock, and it had given me a shoe. A trade. A sick joke. I didn't care. I honestly didn't care. I let out a breath that wasn't a sigh, just an expulsion of stale air. Let it stay there. Let the room fill up with strange shoes and broken toys. Let it bury me in its garbage. I wouldn't touch it. I wouldn't acknowledge it. That was my new plan. A plan born of absolute exhaustion. Ignore everything. Give it nothing. No reaction. No fear. Nothing. I pushed myself off the bed. My legs felt like they were filled with sand. I needed to move, to do something that felt normal, even if it was a lie. The window. I walked toward it, my bare feet silent on the wood. The heavy armchair was back in its corner, a silent witness. The room felt bigger now, emptier without the ticking of the clock. I reached the window and put my hands on the cool glass. I looked out. Nothing. Not the faint glow of a distant city, not the shape of other buildings, not even stars. It was a perfect, depthless black, a solid wall of nothing. It was like looking into an open casket. I pressed my forehead against the glass. The cold felt real. It was the only thing that did. Maybe this was it. Maybe the room was the only thing left. A single bubble of existence floating in an endless void. How long did I stand there? A minute? An hour? Without the clock, time was a fluid, meaningless concept. I just stood, looking at the black, until the cold of the glass seeped into my skull. Finally, I turned around, and my heart stopped. The shoe was no longer under the bed. It was in the exact center of the room. It sat on the wooden floor, perfectly upright, placed, positioned, the muddy sole flat against the polished wood, the untied lace coiled neatly beside it. It wasn't just moved. It was presented. An offering. An exhibit. My new plan, ignore everything, evaporated in a flash of cold fire. My breath hitched. This was different. The other changes, the book, the picture, they were substitutions. This was an addition. And now the addition was mobile. It was active. My eyes darted to the door, bolted shut. To the window, a drop into nothingness. There was no escape, just me and the shoe. I backed away slowly, my heels hitting the wall beneath the window. I couldn't take my eyes off it. It was just a stupid kid's shoe. Dirty, old, but it felt like a landmine, like a coiled snake. The silence in the room was immense. It pressed in on my ears. I waited. For what, I didn't know. For it to slide across the floor? To burst into flames? Coo! Then I heard it. A sound. It was so quiet at first, I thought I was imagining it. A tiny, high-pitched noise. A whimper. My eyes were locked on the shoe. It couldn't be. It was impossible. The sound was like a mouse crying. It came again, a little stronger this time. A faint, shuddering intake of breath, followed by a soft, wet sob. The sound was coming from the shoe. No, that wasn't possible. My mind was breaking. The room was finally cracking my sanity. I squeezed my eyes shut. It's not real. It's the pipes. It's the house settling. I opened my eyes. The shoe was still there. And the crying was louder now. It wasn't a whimper anymore. It was the distinct, unmistakable sound of a small child weeping in despair. A heartbroken, lonely sound that clawed at something primal inside me. The sound was pouring out of the shoe's dark opening, where a foot should be. I clamped my hands over my ears, pressing my palms so hard my head throbbed. I could still hear it. The sound wasn't muffled. It was exactly the same volume. A horrifying realization dawned on me. I wasn't hearing it with my ears. The crying was inside my head. It vibrated in my teeth, a sympathetic tremor in my jaw. It was a phantom sound, bypassing the air, bypassing my eardrums, and playing directly on my nerves. The sobs were getting more frantic. The sound of a child who was lost and terrified and hurt. Each cry was a needle prick against my brain. "Stop it," I whispered, my voice a dry crackle. "Please, just stop." The crying continued, unabated. It was a loop of pure misery. A sob, a gasp for air, another sob. It was a weapon, a form of torture designed to flay me open from the inside out. I slid down the wall, my legs giving out. I curled into a ball on the floor, my hands still pressed against my head in a useless attempt to block out the noise. But it wouldn't stop. It was getting louder, more insistent. It was filling up all the space in my mind, pushing out my own thoughts. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. There was only the sound, the relentless, heartbreaking sound of a weeping child. I had to make it stop. Something inside me snapped. The exhaustion, the despair, it was all burned away by a sudden violent surge of adrenaline. I couldn't let it win. I wouldn't be broken by a goddamn ghost in a shoe. I scrambled to my feet. The room spun for a second. The crying in my head reached a fever pitch. I let out a yell that was half rage, half terror. I had to get it out. I had to get it away from me. I charged forward. 3 steps were all it took. I didn't slow down. I reached down, my fingers closing around the small, grimy sneaker. It felt real. The canvas was rough. The sole was hard rubber. I didn't hesitate. I spun around, ran to the window I'd left open, and with a guttural roar, I threw it. I threw it as hard as I could. It sailed out into the perfect blackness. For a single, fleeting moment, I saw it tumble end over end against the void. A small, white shape against nothing, and then it was gone, swallowed by the dark. The instant the shoe left my hand, the crying stopped. Not faded, not tapered off. It stopped. It was like a switch was flipped. One moment, my skull was an echo chamber of grief. The next, there was only silence. A profound, absolute silence. It was 100 times more terrifying than the noise. My breath came in ragged, painful gasps. My heart was a sledgehammer against my ribs. I stood gripping the window frame, my knuckles white, staring out into the black where the shoe had vanished. The silence was a physical presence. It was heavy. It was watching me. I won. The thought was a fragile thing. I won that round. I fought back. I had removed the piece from the board. I waited. For the rewind. For the lurching sensation of a reset. For my body to be dragged back to the bed. Nothing happened. The silence stretched on. I was still standing at the window. I still had control of my own limbs. Maybe that was it. Maybe the game was to fight back. To reject the impossible things it threw at me. A flicker of hope, small and dangerous, ignited in my chest. I pushed myself away from the window, my body trembling with the aftershocks of adrenaline. I took a step back into the room. My room. My rules. Blink. The world blinked. The lurch was violent, instantaneous. It was a jump cut in the film of reality. One frame I was standing, triumphant, in the middle of the room. The next, I was sitting on the edge of the bed. The familiar, sickening wave of the reset washed over me. The trembling was gone. The adrenaline was gone. My heart rate was back to normal. The window was closed. No God, no, I sat frozen for a second, the hope turning to ash in my mouth. It hadn't been a victory. It had all been part of the game. Another scripted sequence. My movements were slow, robotic. My head turned, a terrible, magnetic pull drawing my gaze downward. To the floor. To the space under the bed. I knew what I would see. I knew it with a certainty that was colder and sharper than any fear I'd felt before. It had reset. Everything went back to how it was at the start of the loop. My eyes adjusted to the shadow under the frame. It was there. The single muddy sneaker. The white canvas. The scuffed rubber toe. The untied lace. It was sitting in the exact same spot, tucked just inside the shadow. But it wasn't alone. Placed neatly beside it, a perfect mirror image, was the other one. A second shoe. Its mate. Together they formed a pair. Waiting. My throat was dry. A pair. A complete set. It wasn't a random piece of trash anymore. It was an invitation. A statement. They sat under there, in the gloom, like a promise of something to come. I couldn't move. I just sat on the edge of the mattress, my body a statue, my mind a screaming void. The game hadn't just reset. It had escalated. It had upped the ante. I had to break the cycle. Not the room's cycle. My cycle. The panic. The reaction. The terror. That's what it wanted. That's what it fed on. I tore my eyes away from the space under the bed. It was a physical effort, like breaking a magnetic seal. I forced myself to look somewhere else. Anywhere else. My gaze landed on the bookshelf. Small, cheap particle board, sagging slightly in the middle. A few paperbacks I'd read a dozen times. And, in the center, a small, silver-plated frame. My anchor. The one thing in this room that was truly mine. A photo of my family, taken years ago at a summer barbecue. Before everything. Before this. I focused on it. I poured every last ounce of my will into that 4x6-inch piece of paper. Mom. Her smile so genuine it crinkled the corners of her eyes. She was wearing that ridiculous sun hat she loved. Dad, standing behind her, his hand on her shoulder, a proud, easy grin on his face. Me, a younger, dumber version of myself, caught mid-laugh. We were looking at whoever was holding the camera. A snapshot of a perfect, normal day. A day that felt like it belonged to another lifetime, another person. A small, warm ember in the cold furnace of this room. I clung to that warmth. Ignore the shoes, I told myself. They're just props. Ignore the game. Focus on what's real. Mom's smile. Dad's hand. The memory. I breathed in a slow, deliberate breath. I could almost smell the charcoal in the cut grass. I could almost hear their laughter. It was working. I was calming down. I was taking back control. I blinked. Just a normal, slow blink. The kind you do when your eyes are tired. When I opened them, the warmth was gone. Something was wrong. The photo was still there. The silver frame still caught the dim light. But something had shifted. A subtle, jarring change that my brain couldn't immediately place. It was like looking at a word that you know is misspelled, but you can't figure out why. A deep, instinctual wrongness. I leaned forward, my hands gripping the edge of the mattress. I squinted, trying to bring the image into sharper focus. The quality was the same. The colors were the same. The people were the same, but their eyes. My heart stopped. They weren't looking at the camera anymore. All three of them, Mom, Dad, and the younger me, were looking straight at me. Their heads were still angled towards the photographer that wasn't there, but their eyes were swiveled in their sockets, fixed directly on my position on the bed. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a plea. It was just a look, a flat, dead, observational stare. Mom's happy crinkles were gone, replaced by a wide, unblinking focus. Dad's easy grin was still on his lips, but his eyes were cold, assessing. My own younger face stared back with an intensity that made the hair on my arms stand up. No. The word was a whisper, a puff of air. It's a trick of the light, a shadow. I'm cracking up. That's it. My mind is finally breaking, and it's twisting the last good thing I have. But I knew it wasn't a trick. I knew it with the same bone-deep certainty that I knew about the shoes. The room was playing again. It had found my anchor, and now it was going to pull. I had to be sure. I had to see it up close. Maybe if I saw it up close, the illusion would break. The angles would look normal again. My brain would fix the error. I pushed myself off the bed. My legs felt weak. The floorboards were cold under my bare feet. I took a step toward the bookshelf. As I moved, the faces in the photograph changed. It happened in an instant. A horrifying, fluid transformation. As I drew closer, Mom's smile began to stretch. It pulled at the corners of her mouth, wider and wider, past the point of any human expression. It became a silent scream, a rictus of painted-on joy stretched over a chasm of agony. The skin around her lips looked thin, translucent, ready to split. I recoiled. A strangled noise caught in my throat. But I couldn't stop looking. Dad's face. His eyes, which had been cold and assessing, sank into his skull. They became two black pits, bottomless and empty. His proud grin didn't change, but with those hollow sockets above it, it became a leering death mask. He was still smiling. Still proud. I stumbled back. My breath was coming in short, sharp bursts. I didn't want to look at myself. I didn't want to see what had happened to my own face in that damned picture. Click whir. BTONG. The sound shot through the silence like a bullet. I flinched, spinning around. The sound was familiar. Impossible, but familiar. My laptop. It was on the desk, where I'd left it. Closed. Dead. But the sound had come from there. The startup chime. The lid of the laptop twitched. Then it rose. Slowly. Smoothly. By itself. The screen, dark for what felt like an eternity, flared to life. The sudden light was blinding. It cast the rest of the room into deep, dancing shadows. My eyes adjusted. The screen wasn't showing a desktop. There were no icons, no background. It was filled with a grid of images, hundreds of them, tiny thumbnails, all showing the same thing. My family photo. My blood turned to ice. It couldn't be. The photo wasn't digital. It was a physical print in a frame. There was no file. It didn't exist on this computer. One of the thumbnails on the screen flickered and grew, expanding until it filled the entire display. It was the photo. But it was worse now. So much worse. Mom's mouth was a gaping black hole, her jaw unhinged. Dad's empty eye sockets were weeping a thick, black fluid that stained his cheeks. And my own face. My younger self's face was gone, blurred into a swirl of flesh-toned static, a featureless void where a person used to be. Then another thumbnail expanded, pushing the first one away. This one was different. Dad's face was now stitched into Mom's sun hat. My own childish hands were clamped around her throat. Another. And another. Each one a fresh nightmare. Each image more twisted, more violated than the last. The photo of me laughing was now a photo of me screaming. The photo of my mom's smile was a photo of her teeth, filed into sharp points. They flashed on the screen, a high-speed slideshow of desecrated memories. A machine gun burst of psychological horror aimed directly at my sanity. This was a siege. It had found the weakest point in my defenses and was leveling it with relentless, overwhelming force. I couldn't breathe. My chest was tight, my lungs burning. I had to get away. I had to get out. Not out of the room, just away from the light, away from the screen. I scrambled backward, my feet tangled. My heel caught on something, nothing, and I went down. Hard. The world tilted and spun. The back of my head connected with the hard wooden edge of the bed frame with a sickening, wet crack. White light exploded behind my eyes. Pain. Sharp and immediate. My vision swam. The room darkened at the edges. For a second, there was only the throbbing in my skull and the relentless, silent flicker of the laptop screen. Then I heard it. Through the ringing in my ears, a new sound emerged. It was small, high-pitched and clear. A giggle. A child's giggle. Soft, playful. And it was coming from nearby. From the floor. My head lolled to the side. The pain was making me dizzy. nauseous. My vision struggled to focus on the dark space below the bed, the space where the shoes had been. It was empty. The pair of muddy, white sneakers was gone. But something else was there. In the deepest part of the shadow, where the light from the laptop couldn't reach. 2 small pinpricks of light. They glowed with a soft, internal luminescence. Red. Like the embers of a dying fire, or the taillights of a car disappearing down a dark road. They blinked. Together. As one. They weren't embers. They weren't lights. They were eyes. Staring at me from the darkness. The playful giggle echoed in my head, a sound that was no longer innocent, but hungry. Predatory. It was the sound of a game. A game of hide and seek. And I had just been found. Blink! The world snapped. The lurch was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that stole my breath. One moment I was on the floor, head split open, staring into the red eyes of a predator. The next, I was sitting on the edge of the bed. The reset. The sickening, familiar reset. My body was whole. The dizziness was gone. The laptop screen was dark, its lid closed, but the pain was still there. A dull, throbbing ache at the back of my skull. A phantom echo of the impact. I reached up, my fingers trembling, and touched the spot. It was tender. A ghost of an injury. The loops were leaving scars now. My first, panicked thought was for the eyes. I dropped my gaze to the floor, to the space beneath the bed frame. It was empty. Utterly empty. The shoes were gone. The red eyes were gone. Nothing but dust and shadows. A wave of relief, so powerful it almost made me sick, washed over me. It was over. That round was over. I let out a shuddering breath and lifted my head. I had to ground myself again. I had to find my anchor. My eyes shot to the bookshelf. The silver frame was still there, gleaming. But it was empty. The glass was clean. The silver was polished. Behind the glass, where the photograph of my family had been, there was only the white cardboard backing of the frame. The picture was gone. It hadn't been replaced. It hadn't been distorted. It had been erased, taken. The room had reached into my life, into my one good memory, and it had stolen it. I was left with nothing but an empty frame and an aching head, a hollow reminder of what I had just lost. The empty frame screamed at me. It was louder than the laptop, louder than the child's giggle, louder than the crack of my own skull. A perfect, polished silver rectangle holding a perfect, clean piece of white cardboard. An amputation. The room hadn't just attacked me, it had performed surgery. It had located the one piece of my soul I had left to cling to, and had cut it out with cold precision. My head throbbed. The ghost pain. A souvenir from a death I hadn't actually died. My hands were shaking. I needed to move. I needed to do something that wasn't just sitting here, staring at the void where my family used to be. I stumbled into the small, attached bathroom. The motion was clumsy, robotic. My feet were cold on the cheap linoleum floor. I didn't look at my own reflection in the medicine cabinet mirror. I couldn't. After what I'd seen in the photograph, I was terrified of what my own eyes might do. I leaned over the sink, my knuckles white as I gripped the porcelain edge. My breath came in ragged bursts, fogging a small patch of the mirror in front of me. I needed heat. I needed something to fill the space, to cloud the world. I reached out and twisted the hot water tap, all the way. A grunt of tortured pipes, then a gush of steaming water, hammered into the basin. Steam billowed up instantly, a thick white cloud that rose to meet my face. It was warm. It was real. It smelled of minerals and hot metal. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me, a blanket of heat and moisture. It clung to my skin, to my clothes. It began to obscure everything. The mirror went first. The small patch of fog for my breath expanded, crawling across the glass like a living thing. It consumed my blurry outline, erased the lines of the tiled wall behind me, until the entire surface was a uniform, pearlescent gray. Good, I didn't want to see. I just wanted to feel the heat, hear the roar of the water, and pretend I was somewhere else. Anywhere else. The sound filled my head, drowning out the memory of the giggle, the image, of those red eyes. I stood there for a long time. Minutes. Maybe more. The water roared. The steam thickened. The ache in my head began to feel distant. A dull pulse instead of a sharp spike. Maybe this was the answer. Sensory overload. Drown the monster out. Then I saw it. Through the thick curtain of steam on the glass. A line. Darker than the rest of the fog. It started near the top. A single, wet streak, as if a single drop of condensation had decided to run straight down. But it didn't fall, it just hung there. I squinted. My brain, slow and battered, tried to make sense of it. Another line appeared. Beside the first. This one was a curve. Deliberate. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't random. This wasn't a trick of the light or the water. A finger. A finger was writing on the other side of the mirror. No, not on the other side. It was writing in the steam itself. More lines appeared, connecting, forming shapes. Letters. Spidery and thin. The handwriting had a slight, forward-leaning slant, with shaky, jagged loops on the D's and T's. My heart stopped. I knew that handwriting. 5 years. It had been 5 years since I'd seen it on a birthday card, on a grocery list, taped to a refrigerator. The last time I saw it, it was on a headstone. My grandmother's. My blood ran cold, a shock that cut through the comforting heat of the steam. I couldn't move. I could only watch, a prisoner in my own skin, as the invisible finger completed its message. The letters bled into the fog, a dark, wet stain against the gray. D-O-N. D-T-R-U-S-T-T-H-E-D-O-O-R. The roar of the water suddenly seemed very far away. Don't trust the door, the main door, the only door. Was this a warning? Help? From who? From what? My mind reeled. Was this the room playing a new game? Or was something else trying to communicate with me? A ghost in the machine? My grandmother. A flicker of insane hope sparked in the pit of my stomach. A clue. A way out. I had to touch it to see if it was real. I raised a trembling hand, my fingers reaching for the glass, to trace the impossible letters, to feel some connection to the message, to its source. The instant my fingertip brushed against the cold, wet surface of the mirror, the water in the sink changed. It didn't happen slowly, it was immediate. One moment it was clear water, steaming and churning. The next, it was thick and red, a deep, arterial red, as if the main water line had connected directly to a slaughterhouse. It pulsed from the faucet, a thick, viscous torrent of crimson that filled the white basin. The smell hit me a second later. It was not the clean, metallic scent I expected. It was the smell of a butcher shop on a hot day. A thick, syrupy, coppery stench that filled my lungs and coated the back of my throat. It was the smell of old blood. My stomach heaved. I gagged, stumbling back from the sink, my hand flying to my mouth. The red liquid splashed against the porcelain, dyeing it a sickening pink. It swirled around the drain, too thick to go down easily. It was pooling, rising, and then the gurgling started. It came from the drain, a low, wet, choking sound. The blood in the sink bubbled. Something was trying to come up, pushing against the weight of the foul liquid. My eyes were locked on the chrome drain cover. The bubbling grew more violent. A single black tendril poked through one of the holes. It was slick with red. Then another, and another. They weren't tendrils. They were strands, thick black strands of hair. More of it pushed its way out. A knot. A clump. It rose from the drain like some horrific sea creature, shedding the red liquid in thick ropes. It was a solid mass of wet black hair, impossibly long, impossibly thick. It uncoiled in the basin, a serpent born from the plumbing. Its body a writhing, tangled nest. It wasn't being pushed by water pressure. It was moving on its own. It was alive. With a final, wet suck, the thing pulled itself completely free of the drain. It slithered over the edge of the sink, the mass of it flopping onto the countertop with a heavy, wet slap. It was bigger than I thought. A rope of it, as thick as my arm, dripped blood onto the linoleum floor. It smelled of the drain and the blood and something else. Something like a damp grave. It turned toward me. The front of the coiled mass lifted slightly, like the head of a cobra. There were no eyes, no face, but I felt it watching me. I felt it focus. A scream tore from my throat. Raw. Animal. I scrambled backward, away from the sink, away from the crawling horror. My bare feet found a puddle of the spilled blood on the floor. I slipped. The world tilted violently. My arms windmilled, searching for purchase on the steamy air. There was nothing. My head snapped back. Time slowed. I saw the ceiling, the light fixture, the crawling mass of hair lunging from the counter toward my face, and then darkness. Snap. The lurch was like being dropped from a great height. I was standing. In the main room. My hands were clenched into fists at my sides. My heart was a jackhammer against my ribs. I was breathing like I'd just run a marathon. The phantom pain in my head was back, a dull, throbbing echo of an impact that hadn't happened. Or had it? The air smelled clean. No blood, no decay. I had to know. I didn't walk. I lunged. I threw myself toward the bathroom, my mind screaming, "Please be normal, please be normal, please be normal." I slammed the door open, my eyes wide, searching for the horror. It was empty. The sink was bone dry, its white porcelain gleaming under the light. The tap was off. The mirror was clear. My own pale, terrified face stared back at me. No steam, no writing. The floor was dry and clean. Relief hit me so hard. My knees almost buckled. It was another loop. It was over. Just a vision. A nightmare cooked up by the room to screw with me. I leaned against the doorframe, my whole body trembling with the aftershock of the terror. It wasn't real. It wasn't real. I let out a long, shuddering breath and pushed myself upright. My eyes drifted down to the floor, to the spot where I would have fallen, and I saw it. Right beside the chrome drain in the middle of the floor, lying on the clean, white linoleum. 3 strands of hair, long, black, soaked, as if they had just been pulled from a clogged pipe. They lay there, stark and undeniable, a physical piece of the nightmare, a souvenir left behind. The reset hadn't wiped the slate clean. It had left a scar. The 3 black strands of hair were a period at the end of a death sentence. They weren't a nightmare. They weren't a vision. They were real. They were on my floor. Leftovers. Evidence. The room wasn't just resetting, it was getting sloppy, or it was leaving trophies of its victories. That meant the other part was real too. Don't trust the door. The words, written in steam by my grandmother's hand, were branded into my brain. The door. The main door. The only exit I had ever known. The one that always led back here. Of course I didn't trust it. But the message felt different. It wasn't just saying the door was a trap. It felt like it was saying the trap was the door. That my focus on it was the whole point of the game. I was a dog chasing a red laser dot on the floor, never thinking to look up at the person holding the pointer. So if the door wasn't the way out, what was? My eyes darted around the small, boxy space. The bed. The desk. The small wardrobe. The window that showed nothing but a brick wall. And the 4 walls that contained it all. The walls. A flicker of something. Not hope. It was too early for hope. But a strategy sparked in my mind. I stood up, my bare feet avoiding the spot where the hairs lay. I walked to the wall next to the main door. I lifted my hand, balled it into a fist, and knocked. Thud, thud, thud. The sound was dull, solid, thick. Plaster, studs, insulation, a normal wall. Nothing. I moved to the next one, the one with the window. It felt colder to the touch. I knocked again, my knuckles striking the drywall just beside the window frame. Thud, thud, thud. Same thing. Dead. Solid. My heart was a frantic, muffled drum in my own ears, a counter rhythm to the knocking. I moved faster. The wall behind the bed, where my head had hit the first time, back when this all felt like a simple concussion. Thud, thud, thud. Nothing. That left only one. The wall with the wardrobe against it. It was a cheap piece of particle board furniture, pretending to be oak. It stood there, dumb and silent. I felt a surge of irrational anger at it, this silent witness. I put my palms on its side and pushed. It scraped against the wooden floor with a dry, groaning sound that set my teeth on edge. It was heavier than it looked. I grunted, my muscles straining. Every inch felt like a mile. Finally. Enough space. I stepped into the gap, the smell of dust and old wood filling my nose. The wallpaper here was a slightly faded yellow compared to the rest of the room, a perfect rectangle marking where the wardrobe had stood for God knows how long. My hand was shaking now. This was the last chance. If this wall was solid, then the message was a lie. Another trick. Another piece of psychological torture designed to make me tear my own cage apart for no reason. I knocked. Thok, thok, thok. The sound was different. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't the dead, flat thud of the other walls. This was a thok, a hollow sound, a resonance. There was space behind it. Not much, but it was there. I knocked again, my ear pressed against the cool paper. Thok, thok. Triumph, hot and sharp, shot through me. It was real. A way out. A secret. My grandmother, or whatever was pretending to be her, had told me the truth. My fingers scrabbled at the wallpaper. I found a loose seam near the floor, where the paper was already peeling. I dug my fingernails in and ripped. The paper tore away with a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. It came off in a large sheet, revealing the pale, chalky plaster underneath, and there it was. A crack. It started near the floor and snaked its way up the wall, a dark, jagged line. It wasn't a surface fracture. It was deep. The wall here was weak. It was damaged. It was a flaw in the design. I found you, I whispered, the words, a raw hiss in the quiet room. I found you, you son of a bitch. I looked around the room, my mind racing. I needed something heavy, something to break through. My eyes landed on the wooden chair by the desk. It was solid, heavy, perfect. I grabbed it by the back, its weight feeling real and reassuring in my hands. This was a tool. This was my key. I was no longer a rat in a maze. I was an escapee with a plan. I stood before the crack, the chair held high like an axe. This was it, the final swing. One good hit and I would be through. I would see what was on the other side. Freedom. Another room. Hell itself. I didn't care, as long as it wasn't this room. I took a deep breath, planting my feet. My muscles tensed. I swung the chair back, and the floor disappeared. The sensation was not of falling. It was of release. One moment, gravity was an anchor holding me to the world. The next, it was gone. Just gone. My feet lifted from the floorboards. The chair, so heavy a second ago, became weightless in my grasp, its momentum carrying it upward, pulling me with it. My stomach lurched. I let go of the chair in shock. It didn't fall. It kept floating, tumbling slowly, end over end, in the silent air. I was floating. I hung suspended in the middle of the room, a few feet off the ground. My arms and legs drifted slightly, like a swimmer in deep water. I looked down. The floor was simply below me. The desk, the bed, the computer, all sat in their places, sturdy and solid. Then the desk wobbled. It lifted off the floor, slowly, majestically. A fine cloud of dust that had been sitting on its surface puffed out and hung perfectly still in the air, a frozen explosion of tiny particles. My laptop, which had been on the desk, rose with it. Then the bed. It groaned as its four legs lifted from the floor. The mattress and sheets stayed perfectly in place. It tipped sideways, a monstrous floating rectangle of wood and fabric. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't a flaw. This wasn't an escape route. This was a defense mechanism. I had tried to break the room, and now the room was breaking the rules. The wardrobe I had just moved slid out from the wall and began to rise. The books on the shelves lifted, one by one, hovering in the air like a flock of strange paper birds. The lamp. The wastebasket. A stray pen. Everything detached from its surface and joined the silent, floating ballet. The room was a snow globe of my own life, and someone had just shaken it. I was trapped in a vortex of my own belongings. The chair I'd meant to use as a weapon drifted past my face, its legs pointing accusingly at me. I pushed off it, the slight force sending me tumbling backward through the air until my back bumped gently against the ceiling. The textured plaster was cool against my shirt. This was the constriction. The trap wasn't just a loop, it was the physics of the space itself. The room was asserting its control, showing me that every single object within it was its soldier. And then the attack began. There was no sound, no warning. The lamp, which had been floating peacefully near the door, shot across the room directly at my head. It wasn't drifting. It was fired. A projectile. Instinct took over. I twisted my body, pushing off the ceiling with my hand. The lamp screamed past where my head had been, its cord trailing behind it like a tail, and smashed into the opposite wall with a silent, concussive force. It shattered, sending pieces of ceramic and metal flying in every direction, new shrapnel in my zero-gravity hell. Before I could even process it, the desk tilted and aimed itself at me. The laptop slid off and came hurtling toward me, a silver bullet. I tucked my legs to my chest. It shot past, missing me by inches. Then came the books. They fired from the floating shelves like a volley of cannonballs. Paperbacks hit like fists. A heavy hardback caught me in the ribs, and pain exploded in my side, forcing the air from my lungs in a choked gasp. I spun wildly, disoriented. This was a firing squad. The heavy wooden chair I had tried to wield swooped down from above. I saw it coming and threw my arms up to block it. The impact was brutal. It crashed into my forearms, the wood unyielding. A white-hot flash of pain shot up to my shoulders. I screamed, but the sound felt thin and useless in the strange dead air. The room was a blender of pain and chaos. The wardrobe tumbled through the center of the room, a massive, deadly obstacle. The bed frame spun like a propeller. I was dodging, weaving, pushing off surfaces that were no longer up or down. A book grazed my cheek, its pages slicing my skin. The wastebasket collided with my knee. Pain was everywhere. Every nerve was on fire. I was losing. The room was too fast, too relentless. It was throwing my whole life at me. The heavy desk, my desk, which I had spent hundreds of hours at, was now my executioner. It was coming at me again, corner first, a battering ram aimed at my chest. I had nowhere to go. My back was to the wall. I couldn't dodge. This is it. I closed my eyes. I braced for the final impact, for the splintering of bone and the crushing of organs. I waited and waited. Darkness. Snap. The lurch was a physical blow. I was standing in the main room. Gravity slammed back into me like a fist. My knees buckled and I caught myself before I fell. My hands were clenched. My whole body screamed with ghost pain. My ribs ached. My forearms throbbed. I could feel the phantom sting on my cheek. I was breathing in huge, ragged gulps. The room was perfect. Pristine. The desk was in its place, laptop sitting innocently on top. The bed was made. The books were neat on their shelves. The lamp was in one piece on the bedside table. And the wardrobe was back in its original position, flush against the wall. It was over. The loop had reset. It had beaten me, chewed me up, and then spit me back out at the beginning, erasing all evidence of the fight. But I knew. I remembered the hollow sound. Rage, pure and undiluted, burned away the fear. Heedless of the phantom aches, I threw myself at the wardrobe. I didn't push it this time. I attacked it. I dug my fingers into the side and pulled, my muscles screaming in protest. It scraped across the floor, the sound a shriek of defiance. I shoved it aside and stared at the wall. It was smooth. Perfectly, flawlessly smooth. The faded yellow wallpaper was seamless. There was no tear, no peeled back section, no hint of anything underneath. My heart sank. A cold, heavy stone dropping into a bottomless pit. It had won. It hadn't just reset my body. It had healed itself. It had erased the flaw. My one small discovery was gone forever. It had all been for nothing. The pain, the fight, all of it. A wave of utter despair washed over me. I slumped against the wall, my forehead pressed against the lying wallpaper, my fists clenched in fury and defeat. My eyes drifted down to the floor. to the spot where I was standing. The floorboards were clean. The dust I had kicked up was gone. But something was there, right by the toe of my left foot. A small, white object, no bigger than my fingernail. It was jagged, asymmetrical, with a chalky texture. I bent down, my whole body trembling. My fingers hovered over it for a second before I dared to touch it. It was real. I picked it up. It was a piece of plaster. It hadn't erased everything. It had missed a piece. It had left a scar. Not on me, on itself. I stared at the tiny white chip resting in my palm. It was a receipt, proof of damage. I had hurt it, in its violent, chaotic frenzy to stop me. It had broken a piece of itself, and had failed to clean it up completely. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It wasn't about the door, it wasn't about the walls, it was about this tiny chip of plaster. This wasn't a prison, it was a war. And I had just drawn first blood. The chip of plaster was a period on a sentence I hadn't finished writing. It was small in my palm, a tiny piece of shrapnel from my one-man war. Proof. I had hurt this place. I had made it bleed. The thought was a shot of adrenaline, clearing the fog of pain from the last reset. A cold smile, feral and unfamiliar, stretched my lips. This wasn't a cage. This was a boxing ring. And I had just landed the first punch. The victory felt hot and clean, burning through the helplessness. I was no longer the rat. I was the exterminator. But the fire died down as quickly as it had flared. The adrenaline faded, leaving a hollow ache behind. I looked around the room. It was perfect again. Immaculate. The walls were smooth. The wardrobe stood flush against the wallpaper. A silent, monolithic tombstone marking the grave of my discovery. The air was clean, still, and patient, waiting for me to try again, waiting to punish me again. The tiny chip of plaster suddenly felt pathetic, insignificant. It was a single tooth knocked from a monster that could regrow its whole head in a second. What was the point? The fight drained out of me. Every muscle I had used to tear at the wardrobe to swing that chair now felt like dead weight. I slid down the wall, my back scraping against the seamless paper, and sat on the floor. I didn't have another plan. I had found its weak spot, and it had simply erased it, patched it over like a pothole. It could heal. I could only break. Defeat was a heavy blanket. I just sat there. I didn't move. I didn't think. I just existed in the box, the plaster chip still clutched in my fist. Minutes stretched into an hour. Or maybe it was just a minute. Time was a joke in here. My eyes, dull and unfocused, drifted around the room, cataloging my prison for the 1,000th time. The bed. The window showing its brick wall. The desk. And on the desk, a single red apple I'd had in my mini-fridge. I must have been reset there. A perfect, shiny, blood-red apple. A teacher's apple. A poison apple. It was an ordinary detail. Something so normal I usually ignored it. But today, I stared. There was a small brown spot near the stem. A bruise. The size of a thumbprint. Apples get bruised. It meant nothing. Just a piece of fruit that had been knocked around. I closed my eyes, wanting to sleep. Wanting to give up. When I opened them again, the bruise was bigger. I didn't blink. I didn't move. I just watched. The brown spot wasn't a spot anymore. It was a creeping stain, spreading down the side of the apple like ink bleeding into paper. The edges darkened, turning from brown to a deep, ugly black. The perfect, shiny red skin began to wrinkle around the corruption, puckering and sagging. It happened fast. Too fast. My breath caught. I was seeing a time-lapse video, but it was happening in real life, right in front of me. The apple visibly deflated, the flesh beneath the skin giving way. It slumped on one side, a dark, foul-smelling liquid weeping from the spreading rot and pooling on the wooden surface of the desk. A fine, white fuzz sprouted from the blackest parts of the decay. The fuzz thickened, turning a sickly green, then a dusty, spore-choked black. The whole process took less than a minute, from a perfect apple with a single bruise to a collapsed, moldy pile of filth, and the smell hit me. It wasn't just the sweet, cloying odor of rotting fruit. It was more. A heavy, damp smell, The smell of a wet basement, of earth that had been turned over a grave, the smell of things left to die in the dark. It filled the room, thick and invasive. It coated the back of my throat. I scrambled to my feet, backing away from the desk. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Okay, something is wrong. This is new. This is different. The smell intensified. But it wasn't just coming from the apple anymore. It was coming from the walls. A dry, whispering sound started behind me. I spun around. The wallpaper, the same flawless wallpaper I had been leaning against, was peeling. A corner near the ceiling had lifted, curling downward like a dead leaf. As I watched, the curl extended, the paper pulling away from the wall with a sound like tearing skin. It exposed the plaster underneath. But the plaster wasn't white. It was covered in a sprawling spiderweb pattern of black mold. The same black mold that had consumed the apple. The peeling accelerated. All over the room, the wallpaper began to blister and lift. Long strips tore away from the walls and drifted to the floor, revealing more and more of the sick, mold-infested surface beneath. The room was shedding its skin. I heard a soft, splitting sound from the desk. The wood, which moments ago was solid, now looked damp and spongy. A long crack appeared on its surface. Then another. I could hear the faint, high-pitched scratching of insects. Termites. The legs of the desk began to crumble, depositing little piles of sawdust on the floor. The entire piece of furniture sagged, the rotten apple sliding off and hitting the floor with a wet smack. The decay was a contagion. It was spreading. I looked at the bed. The crisp white sheets were turning a sallow, jaundiced yellow. Dark, sepia-toned stains bloomed across the fabric, like old water damage. The material grew thin, threadbare, until I could see the mattress through it. The wooden frame creaked and groaned, its joints loosening, its substance turning to punk and dust. The room wasn't just changing. It was dying. It was rotting around me. I was trapped in a corpse. Panic, cold and sharp, stabbed through me. I had to get out. I didn't care about the loop. Let it reset. Anything was better than this. I lurched toward the door, my feet crunching on flakes of fallen wallpaper and splinters of rotted wood. I stopped. My hand, reaching for the doorknob, froze in midair. I stared at it, at my own hand. The skin on the back of my hand was dry, cracked. It looked like parchment. And there, near my knuckles, were 2 brown spots. Liver spots. They hadn't been there a second ago. No. I held my hand up to my face. As I watched, the skin seemed to tighten across the bones. The veins stood out like thick cords. More spots appeared, blooming on my skin like the mold on the walls. My knuckles swelled, the joints suddenly stiff and aching. A wave of nausea and terror washed over me. The decay wasn't just around me, it was on me. I stumbled. A strangled sob caught in my throat. I ran. Not for the main door, for the small bathroom. I slammed the door open and lunged toward the sink, my movements clumsy and stiff. My joints screamed in protest. I gripped the edges of the porcelain, my knuckles white, and forced myself to look up, to look in the mirror. The face that stared back wasn't mine. It was older. So much older. The skin was pale and waxy, pulled tight across my cheekbones. The lines around my eyes, faint laugh lines I barely noticed before, were now deep-carved canyons. My lips were thin and pale. My hair, I watched in a state of catatonic horror as the brown at my temples frosted over, turning a brittle, shocking white. The color bled backward through my scalp, strand by strand, a winter frost consuming a forest. I could feel it happening. A deep, grinding ache settled into my bones. My spine curved, my shoulders hunching forward. A dry, rattling cough tore from my chest. My vision swam, the edges blurring as if I were looking through tears, but my eyes were dry. Old. No, I whispered, but the voice that came out was a reedy, rasping croak. It wasn't my voice. It belonged to an old man, a dying man. I clawed at my face. The skin felt loose, disconnected from the muscle beneath. I could feel the sharp edge of my own jawbone, the hollows of my eye sockets. I was shrinking, wasting away. The room was rotting, and it was taking me with it. I opened my mouth to scream, and the scream that erupted was monstrous. It was the sound of pure, physical agony, not just fear anymore. It was the shriek of a body in revolt, of sinews tearing, of bones becoming brittle, of organs failing. It was the sound of a century of life and pain and decay crammed into 30 seconds. The scream ripped through my thinning vocal cords, raw and inhuman, reverberating off the moldy tiles of my tomb. This was it. The final punchline. The room wasn't just a prison. It was a grave, and it was going to make me watch myself get buried. I squeezed my eyes shut, my whole body convulsing with the force of the scream, waiting for my heart to finally give out. Snap. Silence. The lurch was violent. Gravity, real and solid, slammed me back into myself. I was standing in the bathroom. My hands gripped the sink. My scream died in my throat. I was breathing hard, my lungs burning. I slowly, fearfully raised my head. The face in the mirror was mine. Young. 28. My skin was smooth. My hair was brown. No wrinkles. No age spots. My body felt strong, the aches and pains gone as if they had never been. I took a shaky breath, then another. I was alive. I was whole. The loop had reset. It had saved me. I backed out of the bathroom, my eyes darting around. The main room was pristine. New. The wallpaper was perfect. The desk was solid. The bed was made with fresh, white sheets. The air was clean, a little cool, with no trace of the stench of decay. It was over. The nightmare was over. A shudder of relief ran through me. I let out a long, slow breath. A cloud of white vapor puffed from my lips, hanging in the cool air. I froze. The air wasn't cold enough for that. Not even close. It was a normal room temperature. My breath shouldn't look like that. It was like breathing out on a freezing winter morning. And then I felt it. The aftertaste. It lingered on my tongue, at the back of my throat. It wasn't the metallic tang of fear or the dry taste of thirst. It was the taste of damp soil. The taste of rot. The taste of the grave. The room was clean. My body was young, but it had left something behind. Not on the wall this time. Inside me. The taste was still there. A phantom flavor clinging to the back of my tongue. Damp soil and something sweet underneath. The sweet of decay. I stood in the middle of the perfect, clean bathroom, spitting into the sink. Spitting and spitting, but the taste wouldn't leave. It was baked in. A residue. A ghost. The room had reset itself. My body had reset itself. I was young again, strong again. No longer a husk of brittle bones and papery skin. But it hadn't been a perfect reset. Something had been left behind. This taste. A stain on the inside. And that single, tiny flaw was everything. It was a crack in the mirror. A seam in the wallpaper. It was proof that this place wasn't omnipotent. It could be hurt. It could be forced to fix itself. And in the fixing, it made mistakes. It left things behind. The chip of plaster I'd broken off. The taste of my own death in my mouth. An idea started to form. It wasn't a thought, not yet. It was more like a fever. A hot, dangerous thrill that started in my gut and spread through my veins. If I could force a small reset by doing small damage, what would happen if I did? Catastrophic damage. What if I did something so total, so absolute, that the reset process itself would shatter? What if I burned the whole goddamn thing to the ground? You not tell. The thought was insane. A suicide mission. But I was already dead. I had felt it, tasted it. The choice wasn't between life and death anymore. It was between dying on my knees and dying on my feet. I walked out of the bathroom and over to the desk. The wood was smooth and solid under my fingertips. I pulled open the top drawer. It slid silently. Inside, beside a few pens and a stapler, was a cheap, transparent blue plastic lighter. I picked it up. It felt light, insignificant. I flicked the metal wheel with my thumb. Click hiss. A tiny orange flame danced in the still air of the room. A single, perfect teardrop of heat. I stared at it, my heart starting a low, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. A new plan. A final plan. I didn't waste time. I wasn't going to let the idea cool. I went to the small bookshelf and started pulling books out, tearing pages from their spines with a vicious, satisfying rip. Flimsy paperbacks, a thick history textbook, a novel I'd never bothered to read. The sound filled the room. Rip. Tear. Rip. I threw the mangled pages into a pile in the center of the floor. Next, the bed. I stripped it bare. The clean white sheets, the blanket, the pillowcases. I threw them on top of the paper. A pyre. A sacrifice. I looked at the pathetic heap. It felt like a child's tantrum. My hands were shaking. Not from fear. From anticipation. From a wild, terrifying hope. I knelt down beside the pile. My thumb found the wheel of the lighter again. I took a deep breath, the clean air of the room feeling alien in my lungs. Click hiss. I held the small flame to the corner of a torn page. It caught instantly. A line of black crept along the edge, then curled into an orange glow. The glow blossomed into a weak, flickering new flame. It was small. Hesitant. For a second, I thought it would die out. I thought the room would just snuff it, like a parent correcting a child. Is this real? I held my breath. Is it just another illusion? Another way to torment me? Ione. The flame touched the edge of the cotton sheet. There was a soft whoosh. The fire wasn't an illusion. The flame didn't die. It grew. It devoured the paper with a hungry crackle, climbing the small pyre with terrifying speed. It jumped from the paper to the sheets, the white fabric turning black and then erupting into a brilliant, dancing orange. The light pushed back the shadows in the room, casting my own distorted, flickering silhouette against the walls. The heat washed over my face, real and intense. This was real. A grin stretched my face. A mad, triumphant grin. Burn, I whispered. Burn, you son of a bitch. The fire obliged me. It leaped from the central pile, a burning strand of fabric landing on the cheap nylon rug. The rug fizzled for a second, then melted, a line of fire racing across its surface toward the curtains. The curtains, thin and synthetic, went up like a torch. A column of fire shot up the wall, licking at the ceiling. Black smoke started to pour from the blaze, thick, oily, and foul. It smelled of burning plastic and chemicals. The smell clawed at the back of my throat, making me cough, my eyes streaming. The heat was becoming unbearable. It was a physical presence, pressing in on me from all sides. I scrambled backward, away from the roaring inferno in the middle of my room. The room wasn't resetting. My triumph curdled into a new kind of fear. A raw, primal panic. The room wasn't healing. The fire wasn't vanishing. It was just burning. I looked up at the ceiling, at the small white disk of the smoke detector. It remained silent. No alarm. No sprinklers. The room was letting it happen. It was going to let me burn. It was going to let me choke to death on the smoke of my own rebellion. The walls weren't a cage anymore. They were an oven. And I had just turned it on. No, I choked out, a wave of smoke hitting me full in the face. I dropped to the floor, where the air was clearer. My lungs screamed. My skin felt tight and hot. The fire was a monster now, a roaring, living thing that was consuming everything. The desk caught fire, the varnish blistering and popping. The bed frame was blackening, the mattress inside belching thick, toxic fumes. I was gonna die. This was it. This was the end. Fucking stupid. A stupid, arrogant plan. I crawled desperately toward the door, my one thought to escape the heat, the smoke. But as I passed the wardrobe, I saw it. The wall. The wall behind the wardrobe, the one I had attacked before, the one that had healed itself. It was now glowing, not with reflected light from the flames, but with an internal heat. The fire raging in the room was superheating the wall, and hairline cracks were spiderwebbing across its surface. The plaster was popping off in small chunks, revealing not plaster underneath, but something dark. A line. A seam. The fire wasn't just my executioner, it was my key. A surge of adrenaline cut through the pain and the smoke. I staggered to my feet, my eyes locked on that cracking wall. I grabbed the wooden chair by the desk. It was hot to the touch, and a corner of it was already smoldering. I didn't care. I lifted it high over my head, my muscles screaming in protest. I swung. The chair hit the glowing wall with a deafening crack. Not the dull thud of fist against plaster. This was the sharp, splintering sound of a barrier breaking. The weakened, superheated wall buckled. I swung again, putting every last ounce of my terror and rage into the blow. Crash! A huge section of the wall exploded inward. Not into plaster dust and studs, but into a shower of hot, brittle fragments. It left a gaping, man-sized hole. And beyond the hole there was no fire. No smoke. Just cool, silent darkness. An escape. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think. I threw the broken chair aside and dove headfirst through the opening. I tumbled through, scraping my arms and shoulders on the jagged edges of the hole, and landed hard on a floor that was shockingly cold. I sprawled on my stomach, coughing violently, my lungs heaving, trying to expel the smoke and suck in the clean, damp air. The floor was rough. Concrete. It smelled of wet earth and mildew. I was in a narrow corridor, dark and cold. I pushed myself up onto my hands and knees, my body shaking with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. I did it. I was out. I had escaped. A wild laugh bubbled up in my chest, mixed with another wrenching cough. I turned, a triumphant, tear-streaked grin on my face, wanting to look back through the hole at the fiery ruin of my prison. There was no hole. I froze. My grin fell away. I was on my hands and knees, staring at a wall. A solid, unbroken concrete wall. There was no jagged opening. No hint of the roaring inferno just on the other side. No flickering light, no wisp of smoke, no sound of crackling flames. It was just a wall, smooth, cold, and silent, as if my room had never been there at all. I reached out a trembling hand and pressed my palm against the concrete. It was cold. Solid. Impossible. I had just come through it. I had just fallen through it. My heart, which had been hammering with panic and exertion, seemed to stop altogether. The corridor was real. The concrete under my knees was real. The taste of smoke in my mouth was real. But the room was gone. My prison, my enemy, my entire world, for God knows how long, had vanished as if it had never existed. I wasn't in the room anymore. But where the hell was I? The cold hit me first, a deep, wet cold that sunk right into my bones. I was on my hands and knees on a floor made of rough, gritty concrete. My palms stung. The air smelled of damp earth and ozone, like the moment after a lightning strike. The taste of smoke was a bitter poison in my mouth. I coughed, a dry, racking sound that echoed in the sudden silence. I pushed myself up, my body a collection of aches and screaming muscles. I turned, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, expecting to see the jagged hole I just dived through, to see the fire raging on the other side. There was nothing. Just a wall. A solid, unbroken expanse of gray concrete, sweating in the damp air. No hole, no fire, no smoke, no sound. I stood there, staring. My mind refused to process it. It was like running full tilt into a sheet of plate glass. The impact was silent, internal, but it shattered everything. I reached out a trembling hand and pressed it against the surface. It was real, cold, solid. No, I whispered, the sound swallowed by the space. No way. I had escaped my room only to find that my room had ceased to exist. The thought was a new kind of madness. It wasn't about being trapped anymore. It was about being erased. I forced myself to turn away from the impossible wall and take in my new prison. I was in a long, narrow corridor. It stretched in both directions, vanishing into a gray haze that my eyes couldn't pierce. Above me, a single line of fluorescent lights hummed and flickered, casting a sick, buzzing light on the concrete walls. Each flicker was a stab in my vision. The hum was the only sound besides my own ragged breathing. Left or right, it didn't seem to matter. They both looked like a straight line to nowhere. I chose right and started walking. My scraped knees and the raw burn on my shoulder from the fire were a pulsing, distant pain. My focus was on the corridor. The sheer monotonous reality of it. Concrete floor, concrete walls, concrete ceiling. My footsteps made a flat, slapping sound that echoed back at me, a lonely rhythm in the humming silence. 1 step. 2 steps. 10. 50. The corridor didn't change. The fluorescent lights flickered in the same maddening, irregular pattern. The haze at the end of the hall never seemed to get any closer. Was I even moving? I glanced back. The spot where I'd started was already lost in the identical grayness behind me. A shot of panic went through me, cold and sharp. I'd just traded a small box for a bigger one. Then I saw it. Set into the right-hand wall, breaking the endless concrete, was a door. A steel door, painted a familiar, institutional beige. It had a small, reinforced glass window at eye level and a simple silver handle. My blood ran cold. It was the door. My door. The same one I had thrown myself against, the one that always led back to the same place. It even had the same small black number plate screwed into it. 2B. This can't be real. My feet slowed. I approached it like it was a sleeping animal. All my instincts screamed at me to turn and run the other way, back into the empty grayness. But I couldn't. I had to know. My heart hammered against my ribs. I leaned forward, my breath fogging a small patch on the cold glass. I peered through the window. The room inside was a perfect replica of mine. The bed, made with crisp, white sheets. The desk. The small bookshelf. But it wasn't empty. There was a girl in there. She looked about my age, with dark hair tied back in a messy ponytail. She was wearing jeans and a college sweatshirt, and she was in a total state of panic. Her face was pale, streaked with tears. She was pacing the length of the small room, her hands knotted in her hair, her lips moving in a frantic, silent monologue. She kept looking at the door, then at the window, her eyes wide with a terror I knew intimately. She stopped pacing and suddenly slammed her palms flat against her side of the glass, her face just inches from mine. Her mouth opened in a scream I couldn't hear. Her eyes, wild and pleading, seemed to look right through me, as if I were just another part of the wall. She was trapped, just like I had been. She was in my room, living my nightmare. I stumbled back from the door, a gasp of horror escaping my lungs. My back hit the opposite wall. I slid down to the floor, my legs giving out. What is this place? Meyer. The question echoed in my skull. I wasn't the only one. It wasn't just me. A new, more profound horror began to dawn on me. A dread so vast it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. My head snapped up. An idea, terrible and urgent, propelled me to my feet. I started to run. I sprinted down the humming, flickering corridor, my earlier caution gone, replaced by a desperate need to see. After another 50 yards, there was another door. 2C. I didn't hesitate. I slammed my face up to the glass. Inside, an old man sat on the edge of the bed. He was staring at his hands. As I watched, a switch seemed to flip. His hair, once pepper gray, turned snow white. Deep lines carved themselves into his face like a time-lapse video. His shoulders slumped, his spine curved. A liver spot appeared on the back of the hand he was staring at. He was aging, living years in seconds, right before my eyes. He looked up, his expression one of weary resignation, and then the cycle reset. He was pepper gray again, his back straight, staring at his hands with a look of fresh confusion. I choked back a wave of nausea and pushed off, running again. The corridor was no longer just a corridor. It was a gallery. A museum of suffering. Door 2D. A woman cowered in the far corner of the room, her arms wrapped around her knees. The single lamp on the desk cast long, deep shadows against the walls. But the shadows weren't still. They were moving, twisting. One of them stretched out from behind the wardrobe, elongating into a misshapen, claw-like hand that reached for her. She whimpered, pressing herself harder into the corner. The shadow hand hovered just above her head, then retreated, melting back into the darkness. A moment of peace, before another shadow, this one from under the bed, began to crawl toward her. I couldn't watch anymore. I turned and ran, my breath coming in ragged sobs. The corridor was lined with them. Doors. Dozens of them. An endless row of beige steel rectangles disappearing into the haze. 2E, 2F, 2G. Each one a cell. Each one a private hell. This wasn't a glitch in reality. This wasn't an accident. This was designed. Not a room. A wing. A block. A prison. And I was walking death row. Panic gave way to a singular, roaring purpose. Get out. I ran faster, my lungs on fire, the pain in my body, nothing compared to the terror in my mind. The corridor stretched on, a monument to despair. I passed door after door, refusing to look, refusing to see another trapped soul. They were me. I was them. That was all I needed to know. Just when I thought the corridor would truly go on forever, I saw it. Way down in the hazy distance. A color, a splash of defiant, brilliant red against the universal gray. As I got closer, the shape resolved itself. It was a large, double-wide fire door, painted a stark, industrial red, and stenciled across it in bold white letters was a single word. Exit. Hope. It was a physical thing, a jolt of pure adrenaline that shot through my system and wiped away the exhaustion. I poured every last ounce of my energy into a final, desperate sprint. The red door grew larger, more real with every step. My feet pounded on the concrete, the only sound in the world. This is it. The way out. The real escape. I didn't slow down. I hit the horizontal push bar on the door with my full body weight. It gave with a loud, metallic groan. The heavy door swung inward, revealing not another corridor, but a blast of blinding, brilliant light. It was so intense it hurt my eyes, and I threw an arm up to shield my face. A gust of wind hit me, hot and smelling of dust and something else. Something like burnt sugar and old ash. I stumbled through the doorway, my eyes squeezed shut. I took a step, then another. The floor beneath my feet was different, gritty, uneven. I was out. I was free. I let out a laugh that was half a sob. Slowly, I lowered my arm and blinked, my vision swimming as it adjusted to the light. I was standing on a flat, gravel-covered surface. The edge was just a few feet away. I was on the roof of a building. A skyscraper. The wind whipped my hair around my face. I was high up. So high up. But the light wasn't sunlight. The sky was the color of blood. A thick, roiling crimson canvas that stretched from horizon to horizon. My heart stopped. I took a shaky step toward the edge of the roof and looked down. There was no city. Not anymore. Below me was a ruin. A landscape of utter and complete devastation. Skeletons of blackened skyscrapers clawed at the red sky like broken fingers. The ground was a cracked, barren wasteland, split by deep, glowing fissures that pulsed with a sickly orange light. There were no cars, no people, no life, just silence and the hot, ashen wind. My mind fractured. The room, the corridor, the prison. It wasn't a prison. It was a shelter. It was trying to keep me safe. It was trying to protect me from this. And then I saw them, moving through the canyons of the dead city below. Things, massive, lumbering shapes that defied geometry, their forms shifting and indistinct in the crimson haze. They weren't walking so much as flowing across the ruined earth, silent, unstoppable titans in a world they had already conquered. I stood frozen on the edge of the world, a tiny, insignificant speck on the rooftop of a dead building. The truth crashed down on me, heavier than any wall, colder than any concrete floor. I had not escaped. I had only just realized the true size of my cage. And from the abyss below, from the throat of one of those impossible flowing things, a sound rose. It was not a roar of an animal. It was the sound of a universe being torn apart, a deep, earth-shaking bellow of hunger and triumph that vibrated through the soles of my feet and up into my very soul. A roar that tore the sky. The wind was a physical blow. It was hot, scouring, and it carried the smell of a world on fire. Sulfur, ash, the metallic stench of superheated steel, and under it all, the sweet, sick scent of rot. My eyes burned. The crimson sky wasn't a sky at all. It was a wound, bleeding light down onto the corpse of a city. For a full minute, I did nothing. I just stood there on the rooftop, my mind a blank slate of white-hot shock. The room, the loop, the constant, gnawing fear of the last. God, how long had it been? It all seemed like a child's nightmare now, a bad dream before waking up to the end of the world. The burn on my shoulder and the raw sting in my scraped knees were nothing. They were messages from a life that no longer existed. This was real. The abyss below, the skeletal remains of skyscrapers clawing at the red haze, the glowing orange cracks in the earth. This was the truth I had been trying to break through the wall to see. The prison hadn't been to keep me in. It had been to keep this out. And then the sound that had ripped me from one reality into this one came again. It rose from the canyons of twisted metal and shattered concrete below. A deep, guttural bellow that was less a sound and more a vibration. It resonated in the gravel under my feet, traveled up my legs, and shook the very marrow in my bones. It was the sound of something immense, something ancient, and something impossibly hungry. My eyes, against my will, scanned the ruins, and I saw it. The source of the sound. It was one of the things I'd glimpsed before, one of the massive, flowing shapes. It was an insult to geometry, a being of impossible angles and fluid, shifting mass. Now it was closer. It moved through a ruined street, its form rippling like a heat haze, absorbing the wreckage, pulling it into itself. My breath hitched. My body finally remembered how to be afraid. Then it stopped. The lumbering, flowing motion ceased. A part of its amorphous body, what I could only describe as a head, tilted upward. It was a chaotic mass of writhing tentacles and flesh, but in the center of the chaos, something resolved. An eye. Then another. And another. A cluster of hundreds of slick, black orbs, all swiveling, all focusing, all looking directly at the rooftop. Directly at me. It saw me. There was no thought, no plan, just a single, blinding spike of pure animal panic. My muscles screamed. But there was nowhere to go. Behind me was the red steel door, the entrance back into the humming, flickering hell of the prison corridor. In front of me was a 1,000-foot drop into a landscape of monsters and death. I was a man standing on the edge of a razor blade with hell on both sides. The thing below moved. The roar it let out this time was different. It wasn't the sound of triumph anymore. It was the sound of a predator that had spotted its prey. It was a roar of intent. The entire building shuddered with the force of it, a fine shower of concrete dust raining down from the ledge beside me. It was coming. It began to climb. There was a sound like a continent splitting apart, a hideous, grating shriek as a appendage the size of a city bus, tipped with something impossibly sharp, gouged a furrow into the concrete face of the skyscraper. Sparks, bright and furious, cascaded into the abyss. Then another sound, a huge, wet, slapping impact as another part of its body found purchase. It was pulling its impossible bulk up the side of the building, not with grace, but with brute, world-breaking force. Scrape, shriek, boom! The rhythm of my extinction. My mind finally snapped back online, a torrent of pure, undiluted terror. Run! It screamed. Just fucking run! But where? To the edge? To a quick death on the cracked earth below? No! The other way. My legs decided for me. I spun on my heel, gravel crunching under my worn sneakers, and sprinted. I sprinted away from the edge, away from the blood-red sky. I ran back toward the red metal door, the one marked exit. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. I wasn't escaping anymore. I was begging for readmittance. I was a convict, having seen the outside world, now crawling back to the warden to be locked safely away. The prison wasn't the trap. The room wasn't the cage. The whole goddamn universe was. I could hear it behind me. The grinding of concrete was louder, closer. The building groaned, a deep, structural protest against the colossal weight scaling its walls. A shadow fell over me, vast and sudden. I didn't dare look up. I just ran, my lungs on fire, my heart a frantic, failing machine in my chest. A blast of hot, fetid air washed over me, as something whipped past, so close I felt the displacement. It was a tentacle, thick as a tree trunk, and it hammered into the rooftop where I'd been standing a second before, pulverizing the concrete into a cloud of dust. I reached the door. I didn't slow down. I threw my entire body weight against the horizontal push bar. Clang! The heavy door groaned open. I stumbled through into the familiar, fluorescent-lit grayness of the corridor. Without a second's hesitation, I grabbed the edge of the door and heaved it shut with all my strength. It was halfway closed when the next impact came. A colossal, fleshy limb slammed into the other side of the door. The sound was a deafening boom that echoed down the concrete hall. The red steel buckled inward, the frame screeching in protest. I was thrown back, landing hard on the concrete floor. The door held. For a moment, it held. Another impact, and the metal warped, twisted, a huge, hideous dent appearing at its center. But it stayed shut. Silence. Not the dead silence of the ruined world outside. This was the humming, buzzing silence of my prison. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I lay on the floor for a moment, gasping, my body trembling. The hot, ashen wind was gone, replaced by the cool, stale air of the corridor. The red sky was gone, replaced by the flickering, sickly white lights overhead. I was safe. I was back. A new urgency seized me, more powerful than the fear had been. I scrambled to my feet. I had to get back. Not just to the corridor. I had to get back to my room. My cell. 2B. The room that reset. The room that could maybe, just maybe, reset all of this. I started to run, my footsteps slapping a desperate rhythm on the concrete. I didn't look at the other doors this time. I didn't care about the girl in 2B, or the aging man in 2C, or the woman with the shadow monsters in 2D. They were a part of this place. I was a tourist who had overstayed his welcome and just seen what waited outside the resort. All I cared about was my own door, my own cage, my own salvation. 2G, 2F, 2E. My heart pounded with a terrible, hopeful rhythm. 2D, 2C. There it was, the space where my door should be, and it was gone. There was only a wall, a solid, unbroken expanse of gray concrete, identical to every other section of the corridor. No door, no handle, no window, no number plate. It was as if it had never been there. My escape, my desperate dive through the collapsing wall, hadn't just been an escape. It had sealed the entrance behind me. No, I whispered, the sound dead in the humming air. No, no, no! I stumbled forward and pressed my palms against the cold, unyielding surface. It was real, solid. No! The whisper turned into a roar of pure animal despair. I hammered my fist against the concrete. Let me in! The impact sent a shock of pain up my arm, but I didn't care. I hit it again and again. Please! My knuckles split, leaving bloody smears on the gray wall. I'm sorry. I want to come back. Let me back in. I was sobbing now. Great, heaving gulps of air, pounding on the smooth, impassive wall where my sanctuary used to be. I slid down, my back scraping against the rough surface, and continued to beat my fists against it until they were a bloody, useless mess. I was a fool. A stupid, arrogant fool who had traded a survivable nightmare for an inescapable apocalypse. I rested my forehead against the wall, defeated, the coppery smell of my own blood filling my nose. My tears traced paths through the grime on my face, utterly, completely hopeless. And then I heard it, or felt it, through the bone of my forehead pressed against the concrete. A vibration, not the world-shaking tremor of the monster outside. This was tiny, infinitesimal, like a single gear turning deep inside the thick wall. My frantic breath stopped. I held perfectly still, listening with every fiber of my being. On the surface of the concrete, right in front of my eyes, a line appeared. A hairline fracture, thin as a spider's thread, spider webbing out from the point where my forehead was pressed. It grew an inch, then another. And from deep within the concrete, from the other side of the wall, from inside the room that wasn't there anymore, came a sound. It was impossibly quiet, a tiny, metallic noise, but in the humming silence of the corridor, it was as loud as a gunshot. Click!